I'd like to call this meeting to order. The time is 9:03, and today is Thursday, June 20th, 2019. This is the first day of a two-day meeting for the Physical Therapy Board of California. We are meeting at the California State University Long Beach at 1250 Bellflower Boulevard, Long Beach, California, 90840, in the Barrett Athletic Conference Center, room 223. May we please have roll call?
Alicia Benet-Amen.
Here.
TJ Watkins.
Yeah.
Jesus Dominguez.
Present.
Daniel Drummer.
Present.
Katarina Ellaby.
Present.
Tanya McMillian.
Present.
All members are present and the board has a quorum.
Thank you. And before proceeding with agenda items, I'd like to call on Mr. TJ Watkins to read our mission statement, please.
The PTPC Board's mission statement: to advance and protect the interests of the people of California by the effective administration of the physical therapy practice.
Can I get your microphone on? I'm sorry.
Try again.
Oh, that mic looks dead. You could just turn one of the other live ones right there.
Do you have a line?
Can you reach?
Yeah?
I can pick you up there.
Can you pick me up?
I can.
Okay. Let's do this again. The PTBC mission statement: to advance and protect the interests of the people of California by the effective administration of the Physical Therapy Practice Act.
Thank you, Mr. Watkins. And we will proceed with agenda item number 3, petitions for modification of probation or termination of probation. I'm going to turn this over to our administrative law judge, Judge Eileen Cohen.
My name is opening the record on the petition cases. Okay, the record is open on the petition matters, and I've introduced myself to all the petitioners here today, and I'm going to give some general instruction, so hopefully we don't have to repeat it on the record, and the court reporter is instructed to just note that they've all been given the same instruction. These are petitions for reinstatement. There are 3, and I'll introduce them when each person comes up. The Attorney General is representing basically the public today under Government Code Section 11522. They will make their opening presentation briefly because it will be easier then, because the petitioners, I understand today, are not represented by counsel. The petitioners then will make an opening statement, and you will be sworn in pretty quickly under penalty of perjury, because my experience is if you're not represented by counsel, sometimes you don't know what you're giving as an opening, and it's not evidence unless you're sworn in under penalty of perjury. The court reporter, I'll have you first come up after you make your appearances, go and get sworn in front of the court reporter. At that point then, after the Attorney General finishes, the Deputy Attorney finishes her opening, you'll make your case, make your statement. We do have your exhibit, the petition that you filed, and all the documents. There may be additional documents that the Deputy Attorney General will present. She will have the right to examine you, cross-examine. You have the right then to make a response to that. And that's pretty much how it works. At the end of that, you'll be ready to submit the matter to the board. The board will also, before we submit it, but the board has an opportunity to ask questions. My job here is really more as a traffic cop and to make sure the procedures and the evidence is being followed, that there's admissible evidence, and that the parties are taking their turn, that's operating like a hearing. But this is the board's hearing, and it's their place to ask questions. So I'm going to turn it over to the board president when the Attorney General's finished asking questions. When you're finished asking questions, the petitioners, the board president then will begin by pointing to her colleagues and herself and asking questions. I'm just going to ask the board members to identify their names on the record before they ask questions so that the court reporter can keep track and correctly identify who's asked the questions. And just respond as candidly, as honestly as you can. When you come up, if you still have some questions on the procedure, if it's unclear to you, you can ask. So ask any questions, because this is your hearing, and we want to make sure that you are getting the hearing that you want to present all of your evidence. So with that, I'm going to call the first case, and that's going to be the case of Michael Eisenberg. And if you can, excuse me, it's Matthew M. Eisenberg, OAH case number 2019-05-0487, agency case number ID 2010-69767, and the agency is the Physical Therapy Board of California. So if you can approach to the, you have the table to our right.
You want me to sit?
And if you can sit. And so if the appearances can be made, beginning with the Deputy Attorney General.
Good morning, this is Deputy Attorney General Christine Fryer.
Can I just use your microphone, please? Thank you. I think there's a switch right at the base of it.
It has to look like it's red.
The white button.
It's not there. This button, there's no button there. Thank you.
You might use your pen.
There we go.
Thank you.
Okay. You want to start over?
Are we good now? Can you hear me? Thank you. This is Deputy Attorney General Christine Fryer, appearing on behalf of the people of the state of California.
Okay. And you make your appearances, even though I called you up.
Matthew Eisenberg, petitioner, I guess.
Okay. All right. So would you like to make an opening statement, or, Ms. Fryer?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Before the board and the administrative law judge today is Petitioner Matthew Monroe Eisenberg's petition for reduction of penalty. As an initial matter, before getting to my opening statement, I would like to introduce and offer the following documents for jurisdictional purposes. Everyone should have a binder in front of them with 7 tabbed documents.
Pardon me. Does Mr. Eisenberg get a copy of this?
Oh, yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are these the same documents that the petitioner submitted to the board? Do you know?
Yes, Exhibit 1, which is the first document I'd like to mark and offer, is the petition for reduction of penalties submitted by the petitioner.
Okay, and nothing has been removed from that? They're exactly how he submitted them?
Certain confidential information pertaining to Mr. Eisenberg has been removed. For example, if you look at the very first page, you can see that his home telephone number has been redacted.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to make sure I'm going to mark it as 1 for now, and make sure that Mr. Eisenberg, before your case is submitted today, that you're confident that everything is in there.
It is.
Okay, it is?
Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to admit then, is any objection to 1 being admitted?
No.
So Exhibit 1 is marked and admitted.
The document behind tab 2 in the binders.
And before you go on, it's going to be described as it's stated on the exhibit list, and we're going to provide that exhibit list to the court reporter. If you have an extra one, that would be helpful.
I already have it.
Okay, thank you.
Your Honor, if I may, again, just to clarify with Mr. Eisenberg, that he went through the entire section of 1 just now to make sure that all of his materials were there. Because he just accepted it, but I didn't see him making sure that all of the pages were included. So I would like him to make sure that he
Okay,
has
he
that.
seemed to assure me that he's gone through it all, but,
But he just received this packet just now. just wanna
I
make
did
sure.
receive one via mail, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah,
you
if I
sent.
may, discovery was
Thank you.
produced in this
Yeah.
matter.
Thank you,
Okay.
thank you.
I think, yeah, it would be helpful if we just, if you want to clarify later, we can do that, so this way it runs a little faster, okay? But thank you for that, caring, making sure that it's coming in.
Before we proceed, may I ask if we can just spread out a little more to give the administrative law judge a little room to open up her books? Can we scoot down, Tanya, please? Thank you.
Also, Your Honor, would you mind moving your mic just up? Yeah, that way we don't hear, yeah, we hear your voice, not your papers moving around. Thank you.
I'm trying to get more room.
You don't want to hear me clicking on the computer.
We get plenty of that too.
Okay. Okay. You can proceed, Ms. Fryer. I think. Is everyone comfortable?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was discussing the document behind tab 2 of the binders, which is the notice of hearing, and I would like to mark and offer that into evidence for jurisdictional purposes.
And Mr. Eisenberg, if you can look at this, and when she says jurisdictional purposes, she's just meaning that that's why you're here. You've gotten all the notice to appear at the hearing, and you're here.
I am.
Okay. Is there any objection to Exhibit 2?
No.
Okay, so Exhibit 2 is marked and admitted for jurisdictional purposes as set forth in the exhibit list. Okay.
The document that I'd like to turn to next is that behind tab 4. We are skipping tab 3. And that is the certification of licensure for Mr. Eisenberg, which I would like to mark and offer into evidence for jurisdictional
Okay, it's,
purposes.
Exhibit 3 is marked as set forth in the exhibit list, as described in the exhibit list. And Mr. Eisenberg, if you can check it and to make sure that it's correct.
Your Honor, we're on Exhibit 4.
In Exhibit 4, I mean. I'm sorry.
Looks correct to me.
Okay. So you're sure that this is your certification information is correct?
Yes.
Okay, so Exhibit 4 is marked and admitted as described in the exhibit list.
Those are all of the exhibits that I have to enter for jurisdictional purposes, and I can move on to my opening statement now.
Okay, please do.
Petitioner was issued California Physical Therapist License number 42722 on July 1st, 2015. Effective July 21st, 2015, and pursuant to a stipulated settlement, petitioner's license was revoked and placed on probation for 5 years. Petitioner's probation is scheduled to end on July 21st, 2020. Specifically, the board and petitioner entered into a stipulated settlement after the board filed a statement of issues against respondent in response to his third application for licensure, both priors having been denied. The statement of issues against petitioner alleged that he had incurred 5 DUI convictions in less than 10 years. Respondent's most recent conviction was in 2011. His blood alcohol registered at 0.21, and he was ordered to spend 180 days in county jail. Prior to that, he had incurred a DUI in 2009 with a blood alcohol reading of 0.19 and 0.18. In 2008, he was convicted of a DUI, which involved a hit and run, and his blood alcohol registered at 0.19. In 2005, he received another DUI conviction after he was involved in a single vehicle accident, and his blood alcohol registered at 0.15. Finally, in 2002, he was convicted of another DUI, and we do not have a blood alcohol reading because he refused the test. In the stipulated settlement, respondent admitted to the charges alleged in the statement of issues and agreed that his license was subject to denial. In the stipulated settlement, petitioner acknowledged that in 2009, the board had first received an application for licensure from him. In response to that first application, the board filed a statement of issues based on the 4 DUI convictions that he had incurred at that time. After an administrative hearing, petitioner's application was denied. At that 2009 hearing, and as reflected in the decision in that case, respondent admitted that he is an alcoholic, that he had a sobriety date of November 4th, 2008, that he participates in Alcoholics Anonymous, and that he will continue to for the rest of his life. The board received a second application in 2010, which it also denied. Specifically, respondent had incurred yet another DUI conviction at the time that he had applied for the second time. In 2013, the board received his third application, which it also denied. In addition to his 5 convictions, the board also cited as grounds his admission to alcoholism, his long history of alcohol abuse, and insufficient rehabilitation efforts in light of his 2011 conviction. Pursuant to the terms of his agreed probation, respondent would be subject to certain terms and conditions related in particular to his substance abuse problems. These terms include abstaining from drugs and alcohol, submitting to biological fluid testing, submitting to a clinical diagnostic evaluation, participating in the board's rehabilitation program, and participating in facilitated group meetings. Numerous other restrictions were placed on his license as well, such as prohibitions against home care, solo practice, self-employment and ownership, and supervision of other physical therapist assistants, and aides. Respondent has now completed almost 4 years of his 5-year probation term. Mr. Eisenberg completed the board's diversion program this past February after being in the program for 3.5 years. Mr. Eisenberg now seeks to have his termination terminated early. The criteria that the board is to evaluate in considering terminations of probation are set forth in Business and Professions Code, Section 2661.7. Those criteria are as follows. The first is all of the activities of the petitioner since the disciplinary action was taken. The second is the offense for which the petitioner was originally disciplined. The third is the petitioner's activities during the time that his license was in good standing. And fourth are the petitioner's rehabilitative efforts, general reputation for truth, and professional ability. On a petition for early termination, the burden of proof, which is clear and convincing evidence, is on the petitioner. California Code of Regulations, Section 1399.21, sets forth the criteria for evaluating rehabilitative efforts. Those criteria, similar to those set forth in Business and Professions Code, Section 2661.7, are the original acts that led to the discipline, the time that has elapsed since the commission of those acts, the extent to which the petitioner has complied with any terms of parole, probation, restitution, or other sanctions, and any evidence submitted by the petitioner of rehabilitation. In support of his petition, Mr. Eisenberg submitted a narrative statement, 2 letters of recommendation from licensed physical therapists, the decision and order in his original case, biological fluid testing results from before he was placed on probation, and numerous certificates pertaining to continuing education classes that Mr. Eisenberg has taken. Mr. Eisenberg currently claims to have been sober since April 5th, 2011. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Eisenberg? Do you want to make an opening, or you want to be sworn in, because your opening will be testimony also? Okay, why don't I have you stand in front of the court before and be sworn in under penalty of perjury? You just stand in front. Oh, she can see you there. That's good.
Do you solemnly state that the testimony you're about to give in this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God under the penalty of perjury?
I do.
Now begin.
Good morning, Your Honor, and good morning, board members. I'm here because I filed a petition for early termination of probation. I want the board to know that it is an honor and a privilege to practice physical therapy in the state of California. I know this probably more than most, as that it took me many, many years to get my license. And I want the board to know that after my license was denied the second time, and that last DUI, that last DUI significantly changed my life. Between that last DUI and 2015, when I finally got my probationary license, I had basically nothing to do but work on myself and my recovery. And so for 4 years, I attended many, many meetings, worked with a sponsor, took the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, was of service, took panels to psychiatric facilities and jails and institutions to spread the message of recovery. And so, you know, in retrospect, I can say that, you know, for alcoholics, it takes what it takes to get sober. And it absolutely took that last DUI in jail for me to fully concede to my innermost self that I was an alcoholic. Prior to that, it was easy for me to say I am, but I fully didn't believe I was. And so after that, I got really busy in Alcoholics Anonymous, and my life changed exponentially. I finally was placed on probation, got a job as a PT, and since then my life has gotten so much better again. You know, I got married in recovery. I have a child in recovery. My life has changed significantly. My wife is in recovery. We live a life based on being sober. And as the Deputy Attorney General stated, as soon as I was able to start random drug testing on my own, I started to do that. And that was in 2013 with a lady named Joyce Francis, who is probably pretty well known in the Maximus Diversion Program. She was been there for decades, and she was willing to voluntarily, you know, randomly drug test me. And I did that as soon as I got my driver's license, and I could, you know, be compliant with her requests. So I have been sober since April 5th, 2011. I have over 6 years of random drug testing under my belt. That includes not just urine, but hair and blood. Joyce is, I think, credentialed as a Department of Transportation licensed drug tester, and she was also the facilitator for my health support group in the Maximus Diversion Program. So she's well known in those realms. In addition to that, I continue to be very active in Alcoholics Anonymous. My wife and I attend meetings regularly. Our life has changed, you know, so I don't hit as many meetings as I used to, but I'm still very, very active in the program, and I will be, as she stated, the rest of my life, because my life depends on it. Professionally, I seem to be progressing very well. There's some things that I like to do career-wise that while on probation I cannot do. For example, I'd like to sit for the geriatric certification exam and the orthopedic certification exam, and I'd eventually like to be a clinical instructor, and I do not believe that I can do that while I'm on probation. Also, it's very costly, and you know, we have daycare and other expenses that we would like to, you know, be able to do, and you know, so you put all those facets together. That's why I filed a petition. So that's my opening statement. Thank you.
And it's also your statement of evidence. Is there anything at this point in addition you want to bring out, any documents that haven't been provided to the board?
No.
Okay. Before we started, you said you possibly, I know you're not represented by counsel, but you possibly have a witness. Have you considered whether you want somebody to testify, or your letter sufficient?
I did bring my AA sponsor, Mr. Ellsworth Williams. He's a retired medical doctor, and he is also the facilitator and co-founder for a health professions group that I attend regularly called the Caduceus meeting.
Okay. Would you like to call him as a brief witness?
I would.
Okay, so if you could, sir, if you can come before the court reporter, you can sit right there next to, but stand first and have the court reporter swear you in.
I do.
Can you just state and spell your name for the record?
It's Ellsworth Williams, E-L-S-W-O-R-T-H, last name Williams, W-I-L-L-I-A-M-S.
Okay, and Mr. Eisenberg said you're a medical doctor, so you're still...
Yes, retired.
Okay, retired, okay. Thank you. So if you have questions you want to ask him, that's how it's usually done, or you can ask him a general question, so he's speaking on
Oh,
your
I have to
behalf.
ask him questions?
That's how it usually works. Unless you just want to ask him to make a statement on your behalf, that's fine, too.
Would you like to make a statement on my behalf?
Of course. That's
Okay.
why I'm here. Well, you know, I've known Matthew since 2012, 2011, as a matter of fact. You know, I met him through our mutual need of to recover, and that was through various meetings throughout the community of Redlands. Many meetings we attended together. We've kind of supported each other. He had one of the best sponsors in the area at the time, I must say. Someone who's worked very well, who had like 25 years of sobriety, who recently expired. At that time, Matt and I, who have not only been supportive of each other's recovery, but we've done a lot of things together, shared a lot of experiences together, and worked with a lot of terribly suffering alcoholics who probably were going to die of this thing. And, what I witnessed and participate in with him is, his name is still Matthew Eisenberg, and that's evidenced by his license and his licensing, and he's done wonderful things, and I've aided in that support of him, and he's attended our Caduceus group, which is a group of healthcare professionals. We meet weekly at the BMC, the Loma Linda Behavioral Medicine Center. And we share our problems, our fits, our disgust, anger at times with each other in hopes that we all may join in this community problem, which it really is. And through that process, Matthew has diligently and faithfully been able to change. Yeah, he's still Matthew. He's still an alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic as well. And we weren't born alcoholics. We became alcoholics to no detriment to our families or our upbringing, but he's displayed at last, and it took me a long time to break those bonds of being captivated, trapped by the disease of alcoholism, and he's been able to demonstrate how willing, not only by being willing, but by doing things that, confirm that he is a changed man. He has different beliefs. Yes, he's Matthew again. But he doesn't have the same ideas and future, and the idea that he can change and be of benefit to the community. Able to raise a child, able to have a wife, and be fruitful to himself as well as other people. And he has a bright future ahead of him, and I'm honored that he asked me to come here. And I'd like to thank the board for listening to him and facilitating his chances of early release, so that he may get on with his life in the future. And that's...
Can you just spell Caduceus? The Caduceus.
C-A...
Okay.
D-U-C-E-U-S.
Okay. Did you have any questions you wanted to ask him? Okay. I'm going to do this a little reverse. I'm going to have the Attorney General's, Ms. Fryer, ask him questions, because that's your first witness. And then then you can complete whatever testimony you have, and she'll ask you questions.
Okay.
So, because I want to be able to release you. Do you have any questions for the witness?
I do. Good morning, Doctor. My name is Deputy Attorney General Christine Fryer.
Good morning.
You were a licensed physician and surgeon by the California Medical Board, is that correct?
Yes.
When did you retire your license?
2005.
During the time that you were licensed, was your medical license ever subject to discipline?
Yes.
When?
2005.
And for what?
For illegal prescribing, internet prescribing, and drug and alcohol abuse.
And were you placed on probation?
Yes.
For how long?
5 years.
And you have stated that today you are sober. What is your sobriety date?
October the 23rd of 2004.
And when did your probation terminate? If you recall, when was it over?
My initial probation, I had a temporary license reinstatement in 2000 and, I believe it was 2010.
So approximately 6 years after your sobriety date?
Yes.
I have no further questions.
Now, I'll ask the panel, do you have questions of the witness at this time?
I'll start with Dr. Drummer. Ms. Ellaby?
I'm a little confused on the timeline of your license. You stated that you retired in 2005,
Yes.
but you had a temporary license until 2011?
Yes, I had been out of practice of medicine since 2004, surrendered my license in 2005. At that time, I wasn't going to practice medicine again, and was going to be an alcohol and drug counselor, and took some classes and decided that if I was going to do all that work that was necessary to become a counselor, that I probably should go ahead and try to get my license reinstated. I met some people who would support me in that effort. They wrote letters for me, and I was very much involved with the recovery program. And I became acquainted with Dr. Hartunian, who was the facilitator at the main doctor at Betty Ford Hospital, as well as Mickey Ask, who was the alcohol treatment head at the VA program in Redlands. And through their support, I was able to get a hearing and get my license reinstated on a temporary basis. And I was to ascertain or prove that I was ready to return to medicine. Mind you, at that time, I'd been out of medicine for some 10 years, and there was a specs exam. I don't know whether you're familiar with it. It's a 350 question examination, computer. And my score that was necessary for me to be allowed to practice was 75. And I took the test 3 times. My best score, they wanted a score of 75. And my best score at that time was a 73. And as you can tell, well, maybe you can't tell because I shaved my hair off, that probably it was time for me to retire. So at that time I had pretty much exhausted all my funds, and I decided that my career in medicine probably had ended. So at the point I actively retired officially, not to practice medicine again, and I'm happy with that.
Thank you for clarifying.
Dr. Dominguez?
None, Madam President. Thank
None
you.
for me. Mr. Hawkins?
Yeah, I've just got 2 questions. Thank you for coming and supporting Mr. Eisenberg. So you have a lot of experience in this recovery space.
Yeah.
I see you've got 15 years, am I correct?
Yeah.
You've got 15 years of, so what would you consider the characteristics that someone would have that would be able to successfully maintain their sobriety long term?
Well, I think there are different criteria that we use. The big criteria that I've learned in the rooms is, we have various what we term in AA as character defects, that is faults that allow us to set a gap between what we can do in the community, our contribution to the community, and we say that this is a progressive disease. It doesn't mean that we necessarily drink or use drugs at an increased pace, but that usually does happen. And see the removal, our characteristics mean that we are able to return to the community and contribute to the community in a productive way without using these so-called character defects in order to get through life, without using drugs or other crutches to maintain some type of community standard. And I think that the turning point for most of us is a 5-year mark, that we have sufficiently adapted our lives through principles, that we've learned to live by certain principles. You may have heard of the 12-step program. And if we are able to adopt and adapt to those standards, then we're probably well on our way to a permanent sobriety, only one day at a time. And we have to remember that, and by communicating with sponsors and other members, our support group, the community, and get busy in life in a productive manner, that does happen. It absolutely is possible, and does happen. It's happened for me, and it's happening for Matt as well.
So my second question points to your direct relationship. Since you are very close, we can see that. What was your worst experience, or Matthew's worst experience, that you had to be right there with him in that dark hour to walk him through whatever life situation was pushing on him? He was triggered. All of the, let's just say his board was lit, and he had to walk through this, and you had to be there holding the space for him. And how recent was that? What was the last time that this happened?
That's a rather pointed and somewhat delusional proposition that you put before me. According to our program, there's no human power that can rescue us from addiction. It's addiction. So, I've had people call me for different reasons in dire straits. I had a guy call me 3 o'clock in the morning, and he was in a phone booth. There were still phone booths around then, and with a gunshot wound. And I told him he was calling the wrong people, and they were calling an ambulance. So what you're asking me is somewhat theoretical, and all alcoholics or addicts have to start to live by some principles. So if he gives me a call at 3 o'clock in the morning and he's drinking, there's nothing I can do for him.
So I'm going to rephrase that question, because it is not about, there is no perfect line to recovery. There's ups and downs. What I'm referring to is, in the down, he turns to you. What does that look like for Matthew? We just want to get some insight into where he goes, and then where you show up in the support of that. Not to stop him from drinking. He's just having a bad day.
Well, we're all going to have bad days up and down, and that's part of our living a life sober without using something to support us. So we have materials available to us that we utilize. Sometimes it's just getting to a meeting. Sometimes it's reading a story from our literature, reminding him of the steps, and that this is a mystical adventure somewhat that we're on. And a lot of people don't believe that the steps work, but again, I'm here to attest that it does. So the support, there's nothing magic about the program, but as I said, it's somewhat mystical at times, and I can't give you what happens when anybody relapses or how they recover either. We have a program that does work very well when it's worked properly, and even though it took not only Matt, but myself, a long time to grasp the significance of recovery. And again, I'm repeating myself, but it does work.
Thank you.
Ms. McMillian?
Thank you, too, for showing up to be a support for Mr. Eisenberg. I just have one question, and it's around your retirement. So, did you retire as a result of your license revocation, or what was the reason? Because I'm a little confused with the timeline.
Yes.
Also, so what was your reason for retiring?
Both of those. I was done with medicine, and I was being investigated by the board for drug and alcohol use. I was actually in a program, recovery program, but it really hadn't gotten the message of recovery at that time. Additionally, I didn't really feel that I was fit at that time to practice medicine, and I disqualified myself from further practice by surrendering my license in 2005. But I was first approached by the board in 2004, and I had no real defense. The big problem besides drug and alcohol use was illegal internet prescribing.
Okay, so is it fair to say that you surrendered your license in 2005?
Yes.
But you came back in 2011 and applied again, or what? How?
They awarded me a temporary license.
Awarded?
Yes, temporary license pending. I couldn't practice unless I passed the specs test, which I explained.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, all the questions are finished. Okay, so do you have any further questions based on the board's questions? This works like a funnel, so.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I have just a couple. When you received this temporary license in 2011 from the medical board, was that after you had filed a petition for reinstatement?
Yes.
And was there a hearing on that petition for
Yes,
reinstatement?
a couple of hearings. Yeah.
And as a result of those hearings, you were granted a probationary license, is that right?
Yes, but it was pending me passing the so-called specs test, the SPX.
Which you did not do, is that right?
Right.
So your license was never reinstated after 2005?
Not permanently.
Okay, I have no further questions.
Yeah, did you have any further questions for the witness?
No.
Okay, thank you. So now your excuse as a
Thank you.
witness. Okay.
Thank you.
Do you have any additional testimony? Because if not, I'm going to let the Attorney General ask you.
Do you mind if I respond to Mr. Watkins' question for my sponsor?
Yes, go for it, because you can then follow up.
Well, I think you were trying to get out of him is, have I had any extremely bad days where I would need to call him? And I can tell you that my longtime sponsor passed away in October. And that was probably one of the worst days I've had in recovery. And I can tell you that as bad as that was, I went right to him. I called him immediately. I mean, he knew about it too. And we have a small community of recovery, so the word got around really quick. And we all, gathered together, and we had a funeral for him. And I moved on from that. And he was my sponsor, very quickly after that. And so, I've had many more good days than bad days since I've gotten sober. And I think the tightness that we have is we talk almost every day. So, we kind of work through these things quickly. And, my experience has been that, I've been through marriage and the birth of my child and deaths and all these other things, and the idea of taking a drink has never crossed my mind. And that's that's the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous, is that for some strange reason, the obsession to drink has been lifted. And I can't remember the last time the idea of taking a drink has crossed my mind. It just doesn't even pop up on the radar anymore. And so, through all of life's up and downs, that's what, kind of having a sponsor and a good sober support group is all about, is not having to turn to a drink. And I think, that's the wonderful thing about the Redlands recovery community. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, let Ms. Fryer ask questions.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Eisenberg.
Morning.
If we could turn to the document behind tab 1 in the binder that you have before you. This is a copy of the petition for reduction of penalty that you submitted to the board, correct?
Correct.
And did you prepare this petition yourself?
I did.
And are the statements in it true?
They are.
And did you sign this petition under penalty of perjury?
I did.
I would like to have Exhibit 1 entered into evidence for all purposes, please.
Okay. Any objections, Mr. Eisenberg?
No, except for on number 7 here, my license was denied a couple other times, I think.
And number 7 is number
On the petition for reduction of penalty,
Okay.
page 1.
Page 1. So you're saying it's wrong on the,
Yes.
okay.
Multiple license denials.
Okay. So you have one, the PT license 2009, and
I think it was denied again in 11, and then when I applied in 13, it was denied, but it wasn't. I requested a hearing, and then we got a stipulated settlement
Okay.
in 2013.
Okay. So, but you're not denying that you signed it as number 7 PT license denied 2009?
Correct.
Okay, so that's how you submitted it?
Correct.
Okay, so with that correction from your testimony, do you have any other further objection?
No.
Okay, so Exhibit 1 is admitted for all purposes.
And the petition consists of a 2-page form, correct?
Correct.
And then you are instructed on that form to attach certain materials to your petition, correct?
Correct.
And those materials include 2 letters of recommendations from licensed physical therapists, correct?
Correct.
And if we turn, you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner on each of these pages, there is a document number that starts with AG.
Yes.
If you turn to page AG 0009, this is the statement of issues that was filed against you, is that correct?
Yes.
And so you were originally licensed in July of 2015, correct?
Correct.
And you have been on probation the entire time that you've been licensed, correct?
Correct.
And as has been mentioned, prior to 2015, you had applied for a license before, right?
Correct.
And those applications were denied.
Yes.
Were you working prior to 2015?
From 2011 to 2015, I did a bunch of kind of odd jobs with a friend that I was living with. He has his own company, his own business. So I was kind of helping him out here and there, a bunch of odd jobs, trying to make a little bit of money. I spent the majority of my time doing a lot of AA. And at that time, in 2011, my sister had a baby in Arizona, and I was spending a lot of time going back and forth helping her. She's a single mother. So for 4 years, I was helping my sister and doing nothing but recovery, really. A little bit of work here and there.
If you could turn to tab 5 in the binder before you. And if you look at AG 002, and if you take a moment to review that document, I'm going to ask if you're familiar with it.
Yeah, the stipulated settlement?
Right, this is the decision in order in your case, correct?
Correct.
I would like to mark and offer Exhibit 5 into evidence, and there is a certification page.
Okay, is there any objection to Exhibit 5 being admitted to evidence?
No.
Okay, Exhibit 5 is marked and it's admitted as described on the exhibit list into evidence.
Since you were placed on probation in July of 2015, have you been employed?
Yes.
Where?
United Physical Therapy, United Therapy Network Incorporated,
And since, how long have you worked there?
since August or July of 2015.
Okay, so consistently for the past almost 4 years.
Correct.
Approximately how many hours a week do you work?
40,
So you're full-time.
full-time.
And what kind of work is that?
Physical therapy.
What type of patients?
Mainly, I work in Palm Springs Clinic, and so we see a lot of, I would call, geriatric orthopedic patients.
And what is that clinic setting like in terms of who else is there, who are you working with?
There's another physical therapist there, my supervisor, Mina Yusuf, and we have a couple of PT assistants and a couple of PT aides and front desk staff.
Since you were placed on probation, have you participated in any continuing education?
Since,
Since you were placed on probation?
yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
The requirements for continuing education at the, 30 units, I guess, per every 2 years. I think the first licensure I needed 15, so that and first aid, CPR. The typical requirements for physical therapy. Mainly online classes.
Can I get you just to scoot back to the microphone? just a
Oh,
little
sorry.
bit? Yeah,
Sure.
perfect, thank you.
And the courses that you've taken are courses that you need to maintain your license, is that right?
Correct.
Have you taken additional coursework?
I think I had to take the California law exam before 2015. I think when part of the settlement was I needed to retake that, so I took that and passed it. But no other requirements other than the typical units required for continuing licensure.
Thank you. You mentioned some of the work that you've done through Alcoholics Anonymous with, I believe, people in hospitals and institutions, is that correct?
Correct.
Have you done any other volunteer work besides that?
Yes. A friend of mine was also a dentist, and we have this facility called the Blessing Center in Redlands, and he would, it's basically a community kind of outreach deal, and they had free dental clinics there, and I would go with him twice a week, Tuesday and Thursday nights, and help set up that program.
How long did you do that for?
4 years. I also volunteered there on Saturdays, feeding homeless.
Since you were placed on probation, you have been randomly tested for drug and alcohol use, correct?
Prior to being placed on probation, for 2 years prior to that.
So, okay, let's start there. So 2 years before you're placed on probation, you on your own elected to submit to random testing, correct?
Yes.
And that was at your own expense, correct?
Yes.
Who did you do that through?
A woman named Joyce Francis, who I explained earlier. I met her while I was in treatment, actually, at the BMC. I can't remember, it was a long time ago, but she would come in and do lectures and talk to us. And through our Caduceus meeting, it was recommended that I start randomly drug testing on my own. It would definitely help when I go to resubmit application for licensure.
And the last time that you consumed alcohol was April 5th, 2011, is that correct?
No, it was the night of that last DUI.
So when was that?
I think it was the end of March 2011. And then I went to kind of a detox for a couple days.
So what is your sobriety date?
April 5th, 2011.
And how did you select that date? Because it sounds like maybe your last drink was a little bit before.
Because they give you Valium and other things to help detox, so you're not exactly drug-free until that's out of your system, so.
And so you were in a hospital detox on your sobriety day, is that right?
Yes,
And after that last DUI, you were sentenced to 180 days in jail, is that correct?
Correct.
Did you serve that?
I did, I think I did almost 3 months, and then I was placed on house arrest
And
for the remaining time.
how did the 3 months that you spent in jail, strike that, before you went into jail, were you sober?
Yes,
Prior to your current sobriety date of April 5th, 2011, had you ever tried to get sober before?
yes.
When was that?
2009 when I entered treatment at the BMC.
And was that also at the time that I believe your second application for licensure was before the board?
Yes,
And did you have a period of sobriety in 2009?
I was sober from 2009 to 2011, kinda. I was dry. There's a difference between being sober and dry.
So you weren't working the AA program?
Well, I was going to AA, but we have steps. And the first step is we admitted we were powerless over alcohol. And the second part of that is our lives are unmanageable. And I think for me, I said this in my opening statement, my difficulty with getting sober early on in my recovery was the powerlessness of it. And so I believe in retrospect that I never really took the first step, which is, in our literature says, is the one step you got to work 100%. And so, denial was probably a big part of that.
And so after 2 years of, I guess, being in a dry recovery, if that's a fair way to characterize it, you relapsed in 2011. What happened?
Out of the blue, just stopped at, where was I? I went to have a steak at Outback Steakhouse and had a glass of wine. And the glass of wine turned into a bottle of wine. And then that bottle turned into the bar across the street.
And how long did that relapse last?
That night,
That night?
I got a DUI that night.
That was your last DUI?
That was my last DUI.
Now, in 2009, you participated in an administrative hearing before the board, correct?
Yes,
Pertaining to your prior license application. And we've just discussed it a bit, but at that time you claimed to be sober, correct?
yes, I was going to AA, but I think, let me go back. Yeah, I got a DUI, 2 DUIs in a short period of time, then went to treatment. and passed boards somewhere in there, and my license was denied. And I think it was that next summer I got a hearing. I'm not exactly sure the timeline there.
Right, but at that hearing, do you recall that you testified that you were sober?
Yes, I had like 9 months or something.
Right, because you were at the time, correct?
Yeah, yes,
And you had completed a treatment program, correct?
yes,
And you testified that you had worked the 12 steps, correct?
yes.
And did you believe at the time that you had worked the 12 steps?
To the best of my ability at the time, yes.
And after that hearing, you relapsed, correct? About 2 years later?
2 years later.
And you've talked about it some, so I don't want to ask you to repeat yourself, but you've now been sober for 8 years, is that right?
Correct.
And you've talked about, I think, some of the things that you've done differently in terms of perhaps working the spiritual part of the Alcoholics Anonymous program. Is there anything else that you've done to make this time different?
I wouldn't say I do anything that much different. I think, our literature, as we stay sober, our literature has different meaning. Actually, I'm sponsoring others, which is probably the most important part of my recovery today. Because every time you take a new member through the steps, it has different meaning for yourself. So it's a continuous process. And so I think the biggest part, because I'm not able to get as many meetings in as I would like because of my family situation, and we have a 16-month-old, and we both work full-time, and we don't see her very much during the week, that I think me sponsoring others is how I kind of give back now. And for me, you don't really get the 12 steps until you do that. That's step 12, basically.
And so working with sponsees is helping to keep you sober.
Absolutely.
As part of your probation, you had to participate in the board's diversion program, is that correct?
Correct.
That's the Maximus program?
Correct.
Can you tell me just a little bit about what that entailed?
I like to say that it's more of a compliance program. It's not my recovery program. There's a big difference there. Maximus is, how do I say, the requirements are basically you are subjected to random drug testing. You call in every day, and if your number so-called comes up, you go drug test. You have quarterly reports, I believe, that the paperwork that my supervisor has to provide saying that I'm compliant and that I haven't used or no signs or symptoms of alcoholism. Also, I have to attend, or I did have to attend, a facilitated health support group, and then you pay a hefty fine every month. So, and there's also AA, you have to attend AA. So it's basically everything I was already doing. So I think for me the transition into Maximus wasn't as difficult for me as it could have been for some other people.
And were there a certain amount of meetings a week that Maximus mandated that you go to?
Yes.
How many?
It starts off rather high. I think I was 5 times a week, and then they taper it down as you progress through that program.
And in February of this year, you completed the Maximus program, correct?
Correct.
And when you had entered it, if I'm not mistaken, you had 4 years of sobriety, is that right?
Correct.
And so in the last few months since you completed the Maximus program, you've been attending AA, you've been sponsoring other alcoholics. Are you doing counseling? Is there anything else that you're doing for your recovery program?
I attend our Caduceus meeting. I had to take a break from that meeting because our health support group for Maximus was held on the same night. So I'm back at the Caduceus meeting. I mean, it was only February, so nothing really, I haven't really changed anything in my program since I've stopped Maximus.
And even though you completed the Maximus program, you're still doing biological fluid testing as part of your probation?
Correct.
Do you understand that the purpose of probation, from the board's perspective, is both public protection and rehabilitation?
Yes.
And as someone who's been sponsoring people and through your own life experience, alcoholics relapse, correct?
They do.
Even sometimes when someone has a lot of sobriety, right?
Yes.
Given your history, how can the people of California be assured that you will not present a danger to them should your probation be terminated?
I knew I was going to be asked this question. Here's the deal. I can't guarantee anything, but I can tell the board this, that if I continue to do what I'm doing, that the likelihood of me relapsing is low. I have been around long enough. I have seen close friends of mine, the day they're done with probation or the day they're done with Maximus, drink. And so I'm well aware of that. And what I can tell you is the difference is that Maximus and probation are compliance programs, and it's not recovery. And so you can kind of tell if people are in recovery or if they're just being compliant. And I think I have shown that I am in recovery. And if I continue on that path, the likelihood of me relapsing is low. Now, can it happen? Sure. But I think my situation has also, my support group's also changed since I got my license. I got married to a woman that's in recovery. We have a real strong support group at home. I have a daughter at home who's 16 months old. I have a lot more to lose today than I ever have, and I'm well aware of that. And, again, so if I continue doing what I'm doing, I think the chances of me having permanent sobriety are very good, and relapse is low. And with that being said, I think, it can happen. It definitely can happen. And usually when it happens is people start veering away from what got them sober in the first place. And I have made it very, my wife and I make it a part of our life every day. I wake up to an alcoholic every day. I start my day talking to another alcoholic every day. If we're having problems, we know where to turn. She has her program, I have my program. We don't interfere with each other, get in the way of each other's programs. Also, we have family members that are also in recovery now. That's rather new. My aunt's in recovery. She has coming up on 6 years. So it's not just, going to AA, but it's a family illness and a family disease. And having other members of the family in recovery, she has some family members too. So, my support group is actually getting bigger the longer I stay sober. So I like our chances. The greatest gift we can give our daughter is two sober parents, and we're very well aware of that. And, like I said, if we continue on this same path that we're on, both of our chances of staying sober permanently are very good.
So far, I have 1 through 5 exhibits that are in. Are there any, there's 2 more exhibits that you put in the book. Are you introducing them at this point or not?
As Exhibit 7, Exhibit 7 is petitioner's, it's a certified copy of petitioner's probation file, which I would like to mark and offer into evidence.
And these are all the records of everything he's done on probation, the random drug testing and everything? What's in here?
I don't, it doesn't contain all of the details of the testing that he's done, but it does contain his quarterly reports and evidences his compliance.
Have you had an opportunity to look through this document, Mr. Eisenberg?
Yes.
I guess you're kind of shaking your head, but,
Well, I'm kind of skimming through it.
okay, do you want to make sure? Was there anything pulled out of his probation records, or is this the whole file that you had?
Again, it's aside from redacted materials that contain, highly personal information that's not relevant to this hearing. No, it's the complete file, and it was produced to Mr. Eisenberg.
Okay, so you got this in advance.
It looks correct to me.
Okay, is any objection?
No.
Okay, so Exhibit 7 is marked and admitted as described in the exhibit list.
Yes, and then Exhibits 3 and 5 can be withdrawn.
Okay, 3 and 5. Let's see what we have. So Exhibit 3 is the acknowledgement of receipt and agreement to appear. You can withdraw that.
Mr. Eisenberg is
Okay,
here.
and 5, the decision order in case number 201.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I have my numbers. Let me get my numbers straight.
Yes, Exhibit 6 is the only one that you haven't tried to introduce.
Right, I'm sorry. It's Exhibit 6 and 3.
Okay, so Exhibits 6 and 3 withdrawn. Now, Mr. Eisenberg, when someone brings a document, you have an opportunity to review it and introduce it yourself. Do you want any interest in Exhibit 3 and 6 on your own motion?
No, everything looks fine to me.
Okay, so Exhibit 3 is withdrawn and will not be considered by the board, and Exhibit 6 is withdrawn. It won't be considered by the board. Okay. Any other questions at this time?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Would you like to make any closing statement, Mr. Eisenberg?
No, again, I think, I'll just be brief. First of all, thank you for being here today and listening to my petition.
And then I'll have questions.
I think I come from a different perspective in that it took me years to get my license, and I know how grateful and what a privilege it is to be a physical therapist. And I've done everything asked of me thus far from a probation and compliance perspective. Again, those are separate from my recovery. And I think I don't pose a danger to the public anymore. I think I've had enough provable recovery that that I should quote unquote have the training wheels kind of taken off and let me go about practicing without restrictions.
Okay, and at this time, the board has opportunity to ask you questions.
Sure.
I did a little bit reverse, so
Okay.
you can finish your statements.
We'll just start on my left with Ms. McMillan.
If you can just state your name so the court reporter knows who's talking, that would be great.
Okay, Tanya McMillan. Congratulations on your new baby.
Thank you.
You had mentioned earlier that you'd done some counseling in the jails with the incarcerated or some correction institutions. Did I hear that right?
Yes, we have panels that go out to hospitals and institutions, and throughout my recovery, we've done, along with my sponsor, Ellsworth, and several other members of Alcoholics Anonymous, I've been to Riverside Psychiatric Hospital and spoken in front of inpatient patients there, as well as outpatient treatment centers, the Behavioral Medical Center where I got sober, and some other facilities. We bring panels, basically.
Was that voluntary or was that?
Yes,
like-
voluntary.
Oh, okay.
Mhm. Yep.
Okay, I'm a product of an alcoholic parent, and so I know you're very well aware that alcoholism also affects your family and those folks who surround you. And listening to you, I do hear in your statements that your sobriety and family and community are very important to you. But can you speak just a little bit about how your sobriety is affecting you and your family relationships?
Well, my family is kind of scattered. My parents are in Minnesota. My sister's in Arizona. Yeah, I have kind of two sick parents. I would say my mom is kind of one of these chronic pain patients. The opioid epidemic has definitely hit her. My dad is a codependent, and I think, well, first I can tell you that my parents aren't losing sleep over me anymore. You know, I haven't been in trouble for quite some time, so I'm happy about that. But they see the change in me, and I know they're very happy for me. My sister has expressed too that, you know, I'm a completely different person. Both my wife and myself, we have family members that are in recovery too, and it is a family illness. And you know, so when someone gets sober in the family, it does affect everybody. Relationships get better, the drama stops, all those kinds of things, and we've seen that in both of our families. So.
And then I do believe that people can and do change. I also believe in redemption. And can you just tell me what redemption means to you?
Making amends, righting your wrongs, getting back. I think I've done that, and I will continue to do that. You know, I paid a hefty price for my bad behaviors, really. I mean, I do have a history, and I'm aware of that. And I can say this, though, that I mentioned this before, that it takes what it takes for alcoholics to get sober. And most alcoholics don't get sober. Most alcoholics die from alcoholism. So I'm aware of that, and I'm grateful that I'm, you know, in recovery, because I've seen people die from this. Also, you know, that last DUI kind of shifted my focus. You know, I moved from Minnesota to California to go to grad school, to go to PT school. And when I graduated and passed boards and was subsequently denied my license several times, I had really nothing else to do but work on myself. So I put PT on the back burner, which was the best thing I could have done. I'm a much better therapist today as a result of that than I would have had you guys granted me a license back then. So I'm aware of that. If I was in your position, I wouldn't have given me a license either, in retrospect. And redemption now is I can kind of give back. I see a lot of physical therapy, I believe, especially in Palm Springs, we have a lot of treatment centers. We have the Betty Ford. We have a lot of people in recovery there. And I'm getting them in my office a lot. And so not only do I get to treat them as a physical therapist, but if I choose to disclose to them, which I have, we can talk recovery. Because we have a lot of chronic pain patients, older patients, chronic pain patients coming in these days. And I think that's going to be kind of the norm for PTs going forward, and especially in an outpatient setting, because there is a relationship between, you know, healthy living and exercise and recovering from whatever. So I think I've been able to be useful in that arena as well.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Mr. Watkins?
Okay, thank you. So I have a few questions, and these questions, I'm going to frame them in, you know, more directly to you, since we are looking at you as the candidate that will potentially grant an unrestricted license to. So the rest of the board is going to laugh. My first question is, you speak about out of the blue. And when the last life-changing DUI happened, it came out of the blue. It took you by surprise. So what triggered that? Have you, in all of this time that you've been in recovery, found out what are the primary triggers? There's more than one that leads to this set of outcomes for you. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. During those 2 years that I was dry, I knew I was going to drink again. I just was biding my time. I knew it. I was kind of a miserable, dry person. And so it was just really a matter of time. And that time came out of the blue. But it was going to happen. Triggers. Our literature really doesn't mention triggers so much. That's more of a treatment thing, I believe. I think early on in recovery, people who are just getting sober, the first 30, 60, 90, maybe up to a year, sure, they may have to avoid people, places, things, events, that kind of thing, and that's what sober living is for. That's what, getting out of your environment, unhealthy relationships, that kind of thing is for. But at some point, especially in the process of recovering, there aren't any triggers anymore. I mean, you can have, like I said, you can have life's ups and downs. It's going to happen. You're going to have good days, bad days. You're going to have people die, births, weddings. I had an open bar at my wedding. Half the people there were AA members, so our bill was quite low. I'm happy about that. But again, that's part of life, and I stated this earlier, the thought of drinking over those things hasn't crossed my mind, and that's the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous and recovery. It just happens. And so, sure, if you are not working a program, if you're veering away from going to meetings, talking to your sponsor, working the steps, being of service to others, that is the danger zone, and that's when people may be susceptible to life's triggers. And so I think if you are fully in, but with time behind you, the likelihood of that happening goes down. The further you are away from a drink, the stronger your recovery becomes, I think. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, actually you did. And so that actually leads me into the next question, which is you separate out compliance versus recovery. And this whole process was underwritten by compliance. In fact, you actually bring up Joyce, I don't know what's her last name?
Francis.
And it was as a strategy that you could potentially get your license. So underneath all of this, the whole reason why all of this is happening, the biggest leverage is actually the compliance component, and you build the recovery on top of that. And so that's from my perspective.
Sure.
You can obviously tell me your perspective, which is what we've heard up to now, is that the recovery is the foundation, and the compliance is kind of a side effect. And yet from the outset, the way that you proceeded with this by going into a compliance posture, behavioral pattern through the advice of Joyce, with the 2 years prior going into the biological testing. We don't see that often. We only see that when someone has a good strategy in place. And you had a good strategy in place to kind of build the record. Because you knew at some level you had a big record to overcome, right?
For sure.
Yeah, the record kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah.
So, my question to you is, if all that compliance is removed, you will build the whole thing upon recovery. And you have a record that showed that previously, when we did that, you did not make it. You relapsed. Because there's two primary things that you say. That first, that not that triggers do not apply to you, that you have move past triggers, right? Because that is a, therapeutic tool or whatever, or, I don't know, remember how you phrased it. So that's the one thing. And the other thing is to move compliance kind of to the side. And so here's my direct question. If there was no compliance in 2011, since your sober date, April 15, after you came off the rehab, do you think this recovery would have gone as well? And I'm asking you to look back, to give some weight to the compliance portion versus the recovery portion. And then I'll ask my next question.
I think early on, compliance is a very crucial part, absolutely. So you're asking me in retrospect, would I have been sober?
If there were no compliance, nothing to work for.
Can I get you just to scoot back just?
Oh, sorry. Well, when I got sober, I didn't really have a compliance part of this for the first 4 years, really. I built my foundation of recovery through Alcoholics Anonymous. Although I will say, I needed some provable sobriety to the board when I applied for my licensure in 2013. I applied knowing probably I was going to be heading towards a hearing, because I knew 2 years probably wasn't going to be good enough. And I've been around long enough, and I've been in enough of these hearings with other friends of mine, that it's a process, and it can take a year and a half sometimes, and that's exactly what it took, about a year and a half. And as soon as I got my driver's license and was able to be compliant with drug testing, I did that. It was good to be held accountable, absolutely, but also I needed a track record. So I think, you can get sober without having a compliance program, but it helps, for sure. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, more or less. You see, this is what I'm pointing to, more as pointing out that my question is, if we take the compliance component, which you sort out, right? Because this was the goal, then this becomes the big goal, to ultimately get a license. So let's put it in place. That gives you something to work for. So suddenly you're way more leverage to stay on track. Suddenly the recovery that you speak of has an impetus for having to make it. It's actually almost like it's bolstered up, right? Because you mentioned that you were in a better position when you went into Maximus.
Yes.
And you went into Maximus because you had prior training from Maximus staff about what it takes to actually come before the board and present yourself in that particular way.
You have to say audible answers.
Yes.
Yes. So my question is, you have stacked a life. You've got a wife that is sober and in recovery. You have a daughter and all of it, right? So my next question is, there's a logical aspect of brain, of how we think through, right? And then do we have an addictive part of the mind that doesn't care anything about the logical, right? And it gets triggered by a little something that happens in the environment. And when it triggers in that environment, all of these things that you logically can build your house on goes away. And you have seen it, I'm sure, people that have 15 years, 20 years, 25 years, it falls like that.
Certainly.
Right? And so my final question is, as we veer, you said, if I veer away from what keeps me sober, which the compliance part has been a significant part in my estimation, maybe not on yours, what can you tell me about your practices today in a real tangible way? What is your morning practice? What's your afternoon practice? All of your practices that keep you as an individual separate from your wife, separate from your kid, separate from anything, separate from your sponsor, intact.
Okay, can we just hold it right
Sure.
there? Because we have board members, it's 10:30.
Yes.
And they need a break. So
Okay.
is it okay if you, because
Yeah.
now the full question, keep that in your mind, and we're going to take.
That was a lot to process. I think I understand though.
Is the 10 minutes enough?
Yeah.
Because usually we do 15. We need for the court reporter generally. We need a 15-minute break. We're going to go off the record at 10:32. Okay. Mr. Eisenberg, you heard the question, you had a chance to think about it, so if you can give as succinct an answer as possible.
So I think he was looking for what would I be able to stay sober if I remove the compliance part of my program, I guess. And our literature says that the point of Alcoholics Anonymous and the steps is to grow along spiritual lines. And so, with that being said, we try to live by spiritual principles. Honesty, willingness, open-mindedness, integrity, each helpfulness to others. And we have 3 pillars, unity, recovery, and service. Those, to me, are the compliance part of Alcoholics Anonymous. So they're kind of one and the same. And I don't know what the magic formula for recovery is, whether it's 7 meetings a week, or being of service to others, or the steps, or doing panels to H&I. So my philosophy has been to do whatever is asked of me, number one, and to do a little bit of everything. Because I don't have a magic formula for myself, except for that I'm going to continue to do what's worked for me over the last 8 years. And if I'm compliant with those components, my chances are good for permanent sobriety.
Thank you.
Alicia, your name and no questions. Dr. Jesus Dominguez?
Jesus Dominguez, Mr. Eisenberg, thank you very much for coming before the board this morning. I just had a quick question. Would you say that the terms of your probation are preventing you from gainful employment as a physical therapist?
No.
So I'm just looking at your petition statement here. So you have as number 6, my work and career-related goals are being hindered because of the restrictions on my license. So what I really want to hear from you is sort of on the tail end of your, really is there a magic formula, who knows, is the reason you're coming before the board today to present your petition because you truly feel that you're well on your way to along the road to recovery, or is it that you feel that your progress in your personal and professional life is being hindered by the probation?
Both. I think I said this in my opening statement. Professionally, in all honesty, I'm being paid less because of my probationary status. And it's difficult to get a job while you're on probation. Some people, it takes years. I was very, very fortunate. I got hired kind of right away. With that being said, my bosses come to me and said, look, we'd like to make you director someday, but we can't while you're on probation because you can't supervise, you can't get credentialed from insurance companies, and the list goes on and on. So yeah, my professional, not just monetary income, but also those other things that I like to do. My overall goal is to teach someday, and I'd love to be a clinical instructor. I think that is really my realm. That's where I feel most comfortable is with teaching. And when I was getting my doctorate at Loma Linda, I got to be a teacher's assistant as part of that program, and I really enjoyed it. So it's twofold. Yes, I feel like I'm on my way to permanent sobriety, I guess you could say. I don't think I'm going to be any more safe a year from now than I am today when the terms and conditions, assuming I'm compliant, expires a year from now. But also, my wife and I would like to progress personally to buy a house that kind of thing. And that extra daycare, we have expenses, and so it's financial, it's personal, it's recovery oriented, it's kind of multifaceted, I would guess. It's not just because I want to be done. So.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Katerina Ellaby, public member. I have a couple of questions for you. The first is about your AA process. I wanted to know from you which step you find most useful,
12.
and can you explain why?
Practicing these principles in all of our affairs is probably the biggest challenging part of the program. It's easy to talk recovery while you're in a meeting, but to go home and practice the principles when you're around your family, at work, that's where the progress is shown, I think. And I get most out of carrying the message, mainly to other suffering miserably alcoholics who, hopefully can recover. Our literature does say we can recover. So I get the most out of my recovery when I'm sitting down going through the book of Alcoholics Anonymous with another member, a new person, and it's rewarding to me to see the kind of the light bulb come on in their eyes and watch them change, because then it just reinforces that this thing works. So for me, it's about sitting down with another alcoholic and taking them through the steps.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned earlier there's a difference between being dry and being sober.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that's the same delineation between compliance versus recovery?
Maybe. You can tell when someone is working a program or not. I guess you can hear it. They talk the language. What is important to them when they get here and what's important to them now changes. You can see it in the way they talk and the way they share. So when I am sitting in house support groups through Maximus and I'm listening to people share and they're still complaining about supervision or not being able to do home health care or the cost, and it's been 2 years, something's off. There's no progress being made. They're still bitching, I guess. And, and they're complaining about going to AA. And so, I don't have to go to AA anymore, but I choose to because I like it. My friends are there, new people are there. It saved my life. I owe my life to that program. And, so there is, you can tell if someone's being, in it to get through it or in it to recover.
Okay, thank you. Final question. Are there terms specific in your probationary terms that you find most prohibitive that are keeping you from moving forward in your career, or do you think just having a probationary license in and of itself is prohibitive?
It's the probationary license.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time today and for sitting with us and acknowledging that the board's decisions are not punitive, that we really are here for public protection and through rehabilitation that we're able to exercise that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Daniel Drummer, board member. Dr. Eisenberg, I don't know that anybody's acknowledged that other than you just a moment ago. I want to congratulate you on your success so far, the progress that you seem to have made that you've reported to us, and that you're living is pretty amazing.
Thank you.
And congratulations on finding you through all of this.
Thank you.
I think I just have two questions. You mentioned that you're sponsoring people in program right now. How many individuals are you sponsoring?
Well, through my years, I've had multiple, some drop off, some relapse, some move. I have, right now I have one, and that's kind of all the time I have. I mean, and so we're working pretty intensively together. We meet weekly. We see each other at meetings. He calls me every day. So yeah, I have one that I'm working pretty intensively right now, and but I'm available for more if they ask. But right now it's one.
Okay. And I'm a very strong believer that teaching is one of the best methods for learning. And I'm assuming that that's kind of what sponsorship does.
Absolutely.
And then just one other question. Your journey has been very personal, but I'm wondering, have you had discussions or have you thought about having discussions with bigger groups of physical therapists or physical therapist students about your journey so that it just makes it more, so it could make it more real for them about what life is?
I absolutely have. In fact, my probation monitor, Monty, and I met a couple of weeks ago. Finally, we got to meet after 4 years. And I was telling him that at Loma Linda, my alma mater, the dental program there actually has other dental students and other healthcare people in recovery come and speak to the students. And I have been fortunate enough to do that with the dental program. The PT program hasn't, I think, gone that route yet, and I would love for that to happen. And I think initially in my recovery, I would probably not be willing to do that because probably my ego and whatnot want to be seen that way yet. Now I would have no problem doing that because I think that's missing in the program, in PT programs, of what can happen, you know, and our role in protecting the public and providing services to the public, and if you violate that, and what the business and professions codes really mean. You know, we had an administrative class, but it was not really addressed. So yeah, I think there's definitely a role for me there, whether it's at my school or sitting in a panel like this. I think I would have something to bring. I also have, you know, I was talking to Monty about it. I'd like to contact Maximus, and I feel comfortable as a facilitator too. So yeah, I have thought about that for sure.
Thank you.
So at this point, I don't think there's any further questions.
No.
Okay, so we're ready to submit the matter to the board?
Yes.
Okay, so the matter is submitted, and the record on this hearing is closed.
Thank you.
And we're going to take a couple-minute break for the court reporter to set up for the next hearing.
That's it?
She didn't want to.
You can keep that. That's yours. Okay. You don't have to keep it if you don't want
Before the Physical Therapy Board of California and the matter for the petitioner for restatement of Kelly Marie Hosking, and that's Hosking. It's OAH case number 2019-050224, agency case ID 1D 2015-75959. We are before the board today, and the parties make their appearances, beginning with the Attorney General.
This is Deputy Attorney General Christine Fryer appearing on behalf of the people of the state of California.
Okay, and Ms. Hosking, did you, you're here before me, you heard the preamble I gave at the beginning of the hearing. It seems like yesterday, but it was just a couple hours ago. So do you understand how the matter is going to proceed?
I do.
And you have any questions?
Not at this time.
Okay, do you have any witnesses today?
I do not.
Okay, so if you would stand, and so the court reporter can swear you in.
Today, I have you solemnly state that the testimony you're about to give in this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under the penalty of perjury. I do.
Okay, I'm going to begin with an opening statements of, beginning with the Attorney General's office.
Thank you. Again, as an initial matter, I'd like to introduce some documents to evidence for jurisdictional purposes. Everyone has a binder in front of them pertaining to this case. Turning to the document behind tab 1, this is petitioner's petition for reduction of penalty. and I would like to mark and offer that into evidence for jurisdictional purposes.
Okay. Now, Ms. Hosking, is this the same petition, the same copy that you submitted to the board?
It is.
Have you had an opportunity to go through Exhibit 1?
I did.
Does it have everything in there that you provided?
Yes.
Do you have any objections to Exhibit 1?
No.
Okay, are you admitting it now? Requesting for it to be admitted for jurisdictional purposes at this point?
We can admit it for all purposes.
Is there any objection for it being admitted for all purposes?
None.
Okay, so Exhibit 1, the petition for reduction of penalty from Kellyanne Marie Hosking, petitioner, with all attachments, with some redactions for private information. This is as described on the exhibit list provided to the court reporter, is marked and admitted. Okay.
Thank you. The second exhibit is under tab 2, and this is the notice of hearing.
Have you had an opportunity to look at the notice of hearing, Ms. Hoskins?
I have.
Okay, any objections to it being admitted for jurisdictional purposes?
None.
Okay, Exhibit 2, as marked as noted in the exhibit list, is marked and admitted.
The next exhibit is Exhibit 4, which is Ms. Hoskins' certification of licensure.
Ms. Hoskins, have you looked at the certification of licensure?
I have.
Is it accurate?
It is.
Okay, do you have any objections to it being admitted into evidence?
None.
Okay, Exhibit 4, as described in the exhibit list, is marked and admitted.
Thank you. I will now make an opening statement.
Please do.
Petitioner was issued California Physical Therapist License number 19504 on December 8th, 1993. Effective January 16th, 2017, and pursuant to a stipulated settlement, petitioner's license was revoked and placed on probation for 3 years. Her probation will terminate in January of 2020. Specifically, the board filed an accusation against Ms. Hosking after she was convicted of misdemeanor driving under the influence of alcohol in the state of Illinois. Specifically, she was arrested on or about April 11th, 2014, after officers observed her to be intoxicated. Her blood alcohol tested at 0.28, and she admitted that she had been drinking. The accusation further alleged that Ms. Hosking had previously incurred a DUI conviction in 2009, also in the state of Illinois. Her blood alcohol at the time of that arrest was recorded at 0.17 and 0.16. The accusation finally alleged that petitioner also failed to timely report her arrest and the conviction to the board and provide certain documentation as requested during its investigation. In the stipulated settlement, Ms. Hoskins admitted to the charges alleged in the accusation. Pursuant to the terms of her probation, she is subject to certain terms and conditions related to substance abuse, including abstention, biological fluid testing, submitting to the clinical diagnostic evaluation, participating in the board's rehabilitation program, and facilitated group meetings. Petitioner has been on probation for approximately 2.5 years. In February of 2017, very shortly after she was evaluated for the board's rehabilitation program, she was dismissed from the program as clinically inappropriate. Specifically, the program found that due to her own rehabilitation efforts, including a 28-day inpatient program and intensive outpatient program, and her continued participation in Alcoholics Anonymous and individual counseling, that she was determined not to need to participate in the board's Maximus program. Again, the criteria that the board is to evaluate in considering Ms. Hoskins' petition is set forth in Business and Professions Code, Section 2661.7, and California Code of Regulations, Section 1399.21. And again, the burden is on petitioner to establish by clear and convincing evidence that she has been sufficiently rehabilitated. In support of her petition, Ms. Hoskins submitted a narrative statement, 2 letters of recommendations from licensed California physical therapists, the decision and order in her underlying case, and numerous certificates pertaining to continuing education classes that she has completed while on probation. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Hosking, would you like to make your statement now?
Good morning, and thank you for having me here today. I remind myself as I begin that I am here for my recovery, and I thank you for letting me have a voice in that recovery. I am a licensed physical therapist in the state of California. I knew at the age of 16 I wanted to become a physical therapist from an injury that I sustained myself, and I pursued that goal, that dream. I licensed originally in California, got my undergrad degree actually right here at Long Beach State, my master's degree at Chapman University and Children's Hospital. I began practicing right after graduation, December of 1992, and I love what I do. I must say, as a bit of an aside, I guess, this process has allowed me to better understand that I am not a license on a wall, and I will be a healer no matter what the outcome of these situations would be. And that was a blessing that I would not have figured out had I not gone through this really dark time in my life. I have to tell you that I have also somewhat resented being under the compliance. I would be dishonest to tell you that I didn't. And I work a fourth step on that with some regularity. I began my journey of AA and abstinence and recovery back in the state of Illinois, where I made these offenses, made these bad judgments. I'll tell you a quick and brief situation, but I don't want it to sound like an excuse. I come from an alcoholic family. I come from a family of addicts. I was sexually molested from the age of 0 to 7 by the gentleman who was married to my grandmother. He was not my grandfather. I did not realize that there were issues related to that emotionally that I had not dealt with. I did not realize, quite honestly, that I hadn't dealt with issues related to being an adult child of an alcoholic family. I love my parents, and they're passed away, and I blame them not one little bit. They are wonderful parents. They did the best they could. I'm the first in my family to graduate high school and to go to college, and I pray to God, by keeping a spiritual fit condition, that I will be the first possibly to break this cycle. In a very short period of time, I thrived in therapy. I love what I do. I love helping people. I love teaching. That's why I did get my master's degree back in the dinosaur age, because back then that was the highest degree you could attain, and that's what I wanted to do. I have a decision before me, should I decide to get further educated or not. That's a little hampered by financials, quite honestly. But I thrived with what I did. What I did not realize, and I loved your question about giving back, I did not realize how exhausting and how burn-outable we are in what we do. What we do is physical, what we do is emotional, what we do is intellectual. And in 2001, I have a brother. He's passed away. At the age of 38, I was 36. He died. He was run over in the front of our home. He suffered with addiction, and I was the Al-Anonic codependent in my family. I never drank because I hated alcohol. I hated what I saw it did to people. If you hate something, it has power. And I did not realize that. I, instead of drinking, exhibited my addictive personality by overeating, undereating, overexercising, overachieving, and looking for excessive outside validation. But I didn't realize that that was at the core of me until alcohol took me to my knees. You know, while my brother was run over, he probably did kill himself. It was probably the remnants of all of his addictive personality issues. Tore my mother and father apart, and I stepped up to try to help with that. I was living in Illinois at that time. Back in 1995, my husband was relocated to Illinois. So although I began my practice in California, I then went to Illinois, and I practiced there for 22 some years. And I tried to manage and help my mom and dad as they went through the death of their son remotely. 4 years after my brother died in '01, my mother died at the young age of 60, and I spent the last 47 days of her life on a ventilator beside her bed, and was not able to successfully get her to stay alive. And that was very, very hard for me. Then I had my father, and I stepped up to try to help him and to keep that going. The whole time I was in, the role was called a director position, but I had 350 people under my auspice at a hospital in Illinois, over 30 departments that I managed. What I didn't realize that my cup was becoming more and more and more empty, and I had nothing left to give. And I was turning now, because alcohol seemed to do what chocolate cake couldn't do anymore. Chocolate cake couldn't do it, working harder couldn't do it. And I hate to say it, but honestly, there's a balance to being of service. Being of more service wasn't getting it done either. I was burnt out. Alcohol in my basement did it for a little while. It was during that extreme period of loss that happened in about 4 years, where my brother died, my mother died. I actually experienced 4 failed in vitro fertilizations and a miscarriage. I was trying very hard to become pregnant, and that was never to be during that same 4 years. And what I then realized, I started having PTSD experiences because of the molestation experience of my past, which thoroughly threw me for a loop because I would never have seen that coming. I remembered the events of my childhood. I always remembered them, but I had no emotional connection to them whatsoever. And through the Alcoholics Anonymous program and working the 4 steps several times, I've come to explain it as I'm all Chewbacca and I'm all Spock. And I live my life as Spock, very, very factual, very I'll tell you like it is. And then when chocolate cake or alcohol is introduced, I can find my rage. But I never found my rage without that filter being removed. And I'm sad that it had to happen the way that it did, but that is what occurred. I went to the rehab after the second DUI. I went to rehab. I realized that my life was thoroughly unmanageable. And it was through the inpatient rehab and the outpatient rehab that I found an amazing clinician who does something called EMDR. And EMDR is eye movement rapid dissociation, and it is actually in the clinical research shown as one of the few things that helps with PTSD. So I was struck by the last petitioner's statement that sometimes these things jump out of you from the blue, and they do seem to do that, or they did seem to do that, because my Spock could not explain why I behaved the way I did. And if you ask me today why I made those choices, certainly something 5 and 10 years ago, I would struggle to give you an honest answer. What I thought back then, what I would have told you then, was because of my controlling husband. I would have pointed to my husband's behavior, and that is a word I can't say today, but it is a lie. But it was a lie that I believed. I wasn't trying to lie. I truly felt that it was factors outside of myself that were driving my internal behaviors. But I have learned that is not the case. I continue to go to AA. I continue to work the steps. I'm not currently a sponsor to anyone. They've come, they have gone, but I raise my hand and I'm available. I continue to make a daily amends to my husband, who has had the worst experience with this wreckage, but remains with me after 20 years of marriage and 25 years together. So I am so blessed. I've realized that through some of this, I never lost my faith in God. I've always believed in a God, and I've never believed in a punishing God. But it was honestly somewhat related to the infertility, and it took me some digging to find this. I felt that I was unworthy because God allows women to have children, and that was denied to me. So I finally found a place in my life path where I could not agree with God's plan. I could not get on board with it. And I do believe that it wasn't until I figured out that not only was I stomping my foot like a small child out of frustration that I couldn't have this thing I wanted. I'm not a physician today. I am a physical therapist because I love it, but because I didn't think I could be a great mom and a great doctor. I made that choice very young. And then laughs on me, I didn't even get children. And I tried as hard as I could to have them, and I'll never be a grandma. And it took me years, especially after losing my mother and my brother, to figure out, well, who the heck am I? Who am I showing up as? I'm not a mom, I'm not a daughter, I'm not a sister. And I had lived my life, and I didn't realize I had lived my life to fulfill all of theirs. I had not actually shown up for me. So through this program and through these trials, I've figured out that I am now unwilling. I am unwilling to abdicate my responsibility for me. And I was angry at times in meetings when people would say, oh, I do this for my daughter, I do this for my husband. I would get angry because I don't have anybody to do it for. For some reason, God felt the need to pretty much take away some things in my life. But I've come to a place where I now honor that that means I am to be as close to my God and to my center as I can be. And every day I wake up, and every day I tell myself, today is my gift, and my gift to God is to show up present and available. And I can't do that if I ingest alcohol or substances. I can't do that. So I would like to say to the board, and I don't want to sound like I'm complaining, but part of my unique situation is that because I had started my journey of recovery in Illinois, and even Maximus agreed that they did not need to employ their compliance piece to me, the terms and conditions of my decision in order were a huge hardship on my husband and I. Because although I remain licensed in Illinois, and that was never in question, in order to comply with the terms as outlined, I had to set up a second household in California. I came to California, returned to California in 2016. The DUI was in 2014. The rehabilitation journey in earnest began in 2014. I came because I had an aunt who was dying of pancreatic cancer, and she did indeed die. I came to help with that. Odd timing, but God had me every step of the way, because probably if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't even have pursued keeping my license in California. So I've been practicing 20-some years in Illinois, keeping a current California license. In 2016, I came back to help my aunt. I took a traveler position job, thinking that the ramifications of my DUI from 2014 were completely taken care of in the state in which the infraction had occurred. I complied with all probationary needs, all fines and fees. I came to California to help my aunt. I took a traveler job because my license was intact here. April of 2016, after taking a job in this state, I got notified that this board was going to consider taking my license away if I didn't comply with their compliance program. So that meant that I had to stay even after my aunt died. I had to have secondary household. So not only is it $20,000 of ongoing bodily testing, that's about how much it costs for the 3 years. Not only was it $5,000 to have a representative here for myself at the first decision to even let me have a chance to keep my license. It was another $7,000 in fines I was waged, which was reduced to somewhere in the $4,000 mark. All of that was one piece, but I had to set up a second household. So I could not leave my mortgage in Illinois. And after the 06-07 real estate crash, we were underwater. My husband's job is there. So we've been financially fairly broken over the situation. I would offer that as this process evolves, that maybe if there's ever a situation such as mine, the testing could maybe be done in the other state, and that the petitioner could maybe come back for spot checking while nationally it could still be done. Because I'm not really here arguing in any way the expense of the first ledger line, but it was the fact that I had to live here consistently while my husband lived elsewhere, and I had to make a mortgage commitment in the other state. And I've had to do that for 3 years. And it's really, really hard. But I do not want to give up to alcohol any more than I already have. And I know that when I am on my last breath, I do not want to say that I didn't do everything I could to retain what I believe I've worked hard for and that I'm very good at. And I didn't see a good reason to let it go. Anyway, that is a lot. I am thankful to be here. I hope I can help others through what I've gone through, because it's quite a journey. And I remind myself that I'm not getting shot at dawn, even though this is a scary situation for me. So thank you for hearing me through.
Okay, first I'm going to ask Ms. Fryer to ask you some questions.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Hosking. I'm Deputy Attorney General Christine Fryer. Prior to being placed on probation by the board, were you employed?
Yes.
And what were you doing?
I'd actually come here as a traveler.
To
As
California?
a physical therapist, and before that I was a physical therapist in Illinois.
And were you working for a clinic? Were you self-employed?
No, I was working for subacute rehabilitation with the elderly.
And you've been on probation since January 2017, correct?
That's correct.
And you've been working in California, correct?
That's correct.
And in Arizona?
Illinois, but
Illinois.
no, I have not returned to Illinois since this process began, and for me this process began in April of 2016.
And since January 2017, have you been working full-time?
32 to 44 hours, depending on which week you pick.
And what kind of patients are you working with?
Subacute patients after hospitalizations, for the most part, strokes, Parkinson's, various orthopedic surgeries, Guillain-Barré's, neurological impairments.
Exhibit 1 in the binder that I presented you with is your petition, correct?
Correct.
If we turn to the page marked in the bottom right-hand corner as AG 0004, and to the following page, AG 0005, is this a detailed summary of your employment for the last 5 years?
Yes.
And did you complete this yourself?
Yes.
And it's correct?
Yes.
Since being on probation, have you participated in continuing education?
Yes.
Can you please explain to the board what you've done?
Certainly that's another interesting opportunity. Illinois requires 40 hours of continuing education. 20 of those have to be live and in person, and 20 can be online. California requires 30, and they can all be online. So I've more than complied with both of those states' requirements. Most recently, I went to the Rehab Summit in Las Vegas in 2018. And that was I highly recommend it. It's a lot of different clinicians and lots of different topics, ranging from orthopedic interventions, gait analysis, fall prevention, neurological testing.
And on the 40 hours that Illinois requires and the 30 hours that California requires, is there any overlap between those two requirements? Can, of course, satisfy both.
Yes, I try very hard to make sure that they do, because the expense of the situation makes it handy.
And so in the continuing education that you've done since you've been on probation, have you done more coursework than would be required by Illinois or California, or have you simply met their requirements?
I keep pretty close to meeting the 40 hours that Illinois requires. I might be 42. I don't tend, if there are, and I hate to sound very monetary, but if there are free opportunities, I hunger for knowledge, so I always open myself up to learning.
Since you've been on probation, have you participated in any volunteer work?
Oh, absolutely. And even before probation, I fell in love with a program in Illinois called Horse Feathers, and I fell in love with horseback riding at 47, part of my spiritual journey. And so Horse Feathers is for kids and adults with special needs, motor planning problems, cognitive issues, CP. And so I began doing that in Illinois, and then I recreated a life here in California, both my AA life, additional counseling outlets here, and I also volunteer at a program called Pegasus, which is in the Palm Desert area where I'm living now.
What's Pegasus?
It's a therapeutic riding program as well. So you help kids to be able to stay on horses, and just helps their trunk balance and their attention. And so I volunteer with that.
How many hours a month would you estimate you volunteer in total?
It fluctuates because of weather conditions in Palm Desert, but it can be as little as none at all to as many as maybe 16 in a week, to 2 different days. Because they'll be closed down because of extreme heat or extreme wind. There are different reasons why they've closed down our offerings.
With your petition, you submitted a narrative statement, correct?
I did.
Do you recall that in that narrative statement, which, if it's helpful, begins on page AG0006 of Exhibit 1, do you recall that you stated that your rehabilitation journey began in April 2014?
Yes.
And that was after your second arrest, correct? For the second DUI?
That's correct.
Can you elaborate on that for the board?
After the first arrest, I stuck my toe in the water of recovery. Similar to what we've heard this morning, I thought I was willing. I went to meetings. I did not have a sponsor. I read the steps on the wall. But I did not embrace understanding what was inside of me in the same way that I was able to after the catalyst of the second DUI. I honestly would cry in the shower after the first DUI and before the second one, pleading God to take this thing away, because I could see that I was becoming all the things I was never going to be, and I couldn't understand why I couldn't stop it. But it really was after the second DUI, and who knows what the magic is, we've heard those words too, but I believe strongly that for me the EMDR, in conjunction with a lot of the AA recovery work, was critical. Because I could not find, I did not really understand that the link between understanding childhood trauma and emotionally connecting to what that meant, if you could find a little link there and love yourself through it, then you don't need to drink yourself through it, or eat yourself through it, or exercise yourself through it, or get external validation through it. You can say to yourself, not only am I a child of God, I'm a beloved child of God, and He doesn't make mistakes. And I now know that there are times when there are triggers, when my controlling husband says or does things, where I actually say to him, we can't go there because I don't drink anymore. So I'm going to remove myself from that, and I'm going to take ownership of me. And sometimes that means I go to a meeting. Sometimes that means I ride a horse. Sometimes that means I paint. But I don't go to those same dynamics anymore, and I don't abdicate my responsibility for me. And that's why the recovery happened after that second DUI, because somehow that was the breaking point for me.
Can you just tell us what EMDR stands for?
Eye movement rapid dissociation. It's a technique that is used in post-traumatic stress disorders.
Thank you.
So after the 2009 DUI, did you attempt to stop drinking alcohol after that?
Oh, yeah.
Did you have a period of sobriety?
I could rack up 4 months, 6 months, yeah.
And what is your sobriety date today?
July 11th, 2014.
So prior to the second DUI, you did have some periods of sobriety, but then you'd relapse.
Absolutely.
Prior to your 2014 arrest, can you describe your use of alcohol?
Yes. So I spent 30 years of my life in a fairly abstinent state. I didn't drink. Then I met my husband. I was about 29, 30 years of age, and I was introduced to the fact that there are people who can actually drink alcohol normally. I didn't know that could happen. You could buy a six-pack of beer, you could put it in the refrigerator, and it could live there for more than 24 hours, and I'd never actually seen that. And alcohol is cunning and baffling and seductive and patient and powerful, and it waited on me. So I began drinking like what normies do. I drank socially. I could pair wine with things. I could be sophisticated. And it looked like that was going to work. It looked like the bullet had passed by me. And then at 36, my brother was 38. It was in 2001, and I can remember when alcohol took over. That was when my brother died, and I know that I'd gotten a taste for what alcohol could do, that it could kind of diminish feelings and that it could kind of numb me a bit. And I jumped in with both hands and both feet in '01. And that was a downward spiral that by the time of the '09 infraction, I thought that was going to be it. I really did. If you'd asked me then, I would have swore to you that would have been it. But 2014 was still to come, so there was another yet.
Do you have any concerns that if your probation is terminated and that you no longer have to participate in biological fluid testing, that you'll relapse?
I know that relapse can be part of this disease, and I pray and hope and live in a way that I strive to reduce the risk of that. I don't believe I'll relapse if probation is released. It's my understanding that by the time I'm notified that probation would be relinquished, I probably only have 4 months left to see out this journey. And I've questioned myself, why would I put myself through this stress? Why not just keep along, But I'll promise you that the compliance part is very stressful for some of us who can't seem to have concentrated enough pee, or pee that has the right amount of creatinine, or for whatever reason my urine doesn't like to behave itself. It never gives you a positive, but I seem to have dilute specimens, and I have to work very hard to make sure they're not dilute, and I have to not drink water, and I have to do certain things every morning when I test that little phone and look to see if my number's been called. And it is stressful for me because part of what happened in my 0 to 7, the end of the encounters, were always that I was made to sit on a toilet and pee, so that I'm sure that it would reduce any risk of infection and probably allow the perpetrator to get along without problems. So me having to pee in front of an observer has been an interesting challenge. And I see it as an opportunity to overcome that issue, but I will promise you it's not easy. So do I want to be released a little early for my own psychological, emotional reasons, for my own financial reasons? Yes. Do I think it has any bearing on whether or not I stay sober? None whatsoever. I really believe that I'll stay sober whether this is released or whether I see it through to January of 2020.
You testified that at times you have resented being on probation, correct?
Yes.
And that you did a 4th step on that, correct?
Many times.
Can you explain what it means to do a 4th step on something?
When I start to feel a resentment or an anger, something that I might start to ruminate on and allow to start niggling away at me, I realize, hey, that's kind of coming back a little bit. I'll journal on it sometimes. I'll pray about it sometimes. I'll take it to my sponsor sometimes. I'll talk about it at a meeting sometimes, but I air it. I get it outside of me. And just by doing that, by whichever modality, whether it's writing, whether it's speaking or praying, it takes the power out of that thing. And then I usually almost immediately now, I think I must have been in a period of depression and grief through those things I described, because I can promise you there was a period in my life where, and I'm a positive person, it's who I always was, but I wasn't for a while. my mind would go to the negative. My mind would go to the lesser than. My mind would go to the why me. And that was an unusual place for me because that was never who I was. And now I'm not that again. So now when I do fourth steps on things that bug me, very quickly my mind goes to yes, but at least you're healthy and you can do it and you do have some resources and you and your husband are strengthening your marriage because of what's gone on. And I find the positive that comes through it. So I don't know if that helps you with what a fourth step is. But in theory, you look at what's my part in something. And so sometimes that with this can get tricky because in all honesty, I think I have paid a heavy, heavy price for my infractions. And I'm continuing to pay that price. So then I look and I say, but I haven't killed anybody and I don't have to live with that as part of my part in anything. So that I'm thankful for. But all the financial repercussions and the fact that the wreckage of my past is still coming along is difficult. And so I have to right-size myself and right-size the situation, and that's what a fourth step does. Does that help?
Yes. So the fourth step is essentially creating an inventory, correct?
When you do a first full one, you try to do a life look, and so it's quite encompassing. And I've done a fourth step as a life look about 3 times now in full, and I can promise you that as you grow and evolve, your fourth steps, even on the same things, look different. So at first, my first fourth step of my life, what I realized was that I was losing hope in all aspects of my life. So when my brother died, I guess I had hoped that and this sounds like a baby, but this is where my mind was then, I'd hoped there'd be more room in my mom and dad's life for me. And so I wanted to be prettier and funnier and more successful and have more accolades so that there'd be more room for me, because probably the reason there hadn't been was because my brother needed more help than I did, right? But then he died, and then my parents still weren't available for me in the way I wanted, right? So you go through these life things and you see that. But now when I look at my life things, having done another fourth step on all those things, I go, wait a minute, what's driving Kelly? Why do I not feel good enough? I used to say that I had a hard work ethic and I would work so hard because I'm such a good worker. And part of that's true, but I think I work so hard because I need to be 150% for me to feel like I'm as good as you. And I need to take a step back and say, no, I'm good enough. I'm just as I should be. I don't have to be driven. So again, I feel like I'm rambling a bit on fourth step, but it's a very complex situation. I was never worried about doing a fourth step. Fourth step and fifth step, I thought I was eager. I wanted to do those. I wanted to delve in. But I can promise you for me, and I guess the question wasn't asked, but 6 and 7 are where I have to really put a lot of my time and energy, because I always lived in 10, 11, and 12. I lived with a family of alcoholics and addicts.
And you understand that here that the purpose of probation is public protection and your rehabilitation, correct?
I understand.
And how can the people of California be assured that you will not present a danger to the public if your probation is terminated early?
I believe that my actions up to this point should be of some reassurance. There are no guarantees, and I intend to continue those patterns of behavior, continue to get to know myself and to learn and love myself as I go forward in this life. I have a better life than where those other behaviors were taking me.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Okay, now to the board.
I'll start. Alicia Rabina Amen. And Ms. Hosking, can you explain again why you want to stay in California?
If you'd asked me that question back in 2016, I would have been, no, I actually want to retain the ability to be flexible in California, but I had all intentions of going back to now our lives are taking us in a direction that I believe I will probably be staying here. Ultimately, I didn't want my license to be irrevocably marked, and I wondered if that was ego. Part of it probably was ego. The story of my aunt, which didn't completely come out, and one day we'll make a Hallmark movie on it. But when she was dying, she was 63. She was expecting her first grandbaby. She did not make it to see that child from her only son, who she's divorced from my uncle with. And on her deathbed, literally, she knew my struggles with not being able to be a mom or a grandma. On her deathbed, she privileged me with, can you be the mom on this side, grandma for me on this side? I'll watch from the other side. And what an honor that she would ask me to do that. And I said to my husband then, you know, if we go back, and this was in the July, so the board had already commissioned me with the, we're going to take your license if you don't consider doing these things in the April. And I was still struggling with, are we going to sign up for this? This is expensive. This is a life change. Is this worth it? Is this ego? And then my aunt, she did not know about this situation. I wasn't going to tell her when her medical situation, about my board situation. I was thinking, do I go back to Illinois? Do I just continue my life? And she asked me that. And I knew that if I went back to Illinois, because I'd been there for 22 years, in a blink of an eye, 22 more years would be gone. And I wouldn't have been a presence in little Caden's life. Caden was born in September. My aunt died in July. But now we do see Caden about once a month or so. We don't live entirely close. They live out here in Santa Rancho Margarita area. I always say that wrong. And we're in Palm Desert. But so we have the ability to have that link. So part of that is why staying in California is in our moderate term future. I also I'm getting older, I'm 55, but I still would like the flexibility of licensure maybe in other states and the flexibility of traveling and pursuing what I do elsewhere. And a national database mark is not helpful to that cause. And some of it I'm sure is ego. That, you know, I don't want to lose. I've lost other things to alcohol. I don't think that I have to lose this to alcohol. So.
And when you say we get to see little Cadence once a month, who's we?
My husband and I.
So he's living here?
No. He lives at our home in Illinois, and he travels. So he's probably here about every other to every third month.
Okay. You talked a little bit about early termination and just waiting it out. Why are you here today? Why not just wait it out?
Some of the things that I was speaking to, it's quite difficult for me emotionally. Some of my past, it's expensive. It would save me, just the 4 months will save me about $2,000 of biological testing. I believe I owe it to my husband as well to seek some relief from these situations. So that's, and then why not just wait it out too? For me, I realize this is part of my recovery part. This is mumbo jumbo psychiatric speak, but my little girl didn't have a voice for a long time, and my little girl has a voice. And thank you for letting her express herself. Because I had to, in the past, do things under authority figures that were not right. And you are respected authority figures. So you've given me a vehicle to realize that as scary as that feels to some of us, I'm not going to die from it. And my parents aren't going to be killed because of it. All threats that were made. And so you've let me have a similar situation, but as a grown woman. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. Are you an alcoholic?
Yes.
Do you have a sponsor?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Drummer.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And presenting your story, and sharing, and congratulations on your progress so far through your probation, the things that you've done. Just two questions. You mentioned there are times when your husband says, let's go here, let's go someplace, and you say, oh, there's alcohol there. And
no, I did not say that.
Okay, then I misunderstood. So when life events happen, and you're put into situations where alcohol is present, how do you react? What do you do in those situations?
I coexist in a world with alcohol, so I act normally. People are able to do what they do. What I was saying about my husband and I, he just has a controlling nature at times, as do people. So it has nothing to do linked with alcohol and us.
Understood.
It's just marital things.
Okay. And because you went to Las Vegas for
Yes.
continuing education, where partying of all sorts is.
Been on cruises. I've gone to Bill W. meetings on cruises. So yeah, it's everywhere you want it to be.
Okay. And then you mentioned you have a Spock side and a Chewbacca side.
Uh-huh.
And I heard you talking about Spock being logical, and I didn't hear you talk about Chewbacca. And then I want to maybe see if you can how you're relating Star Trek and Star Wars in that analogy.
Right. Well, Spock is very much, this does not compute, this does not make sense. And Chewbacca just wants to put his head back and scream. And there are legitimately things in my life story that would make anyone want to put their head back and scream. And I didn't do any of that for the longest time. And sometimes we need to have healthy ways that we let out our emotions. And one of the things I realized, and it was such a subtle thing, I have had the honor of being secretary at AA meetings. And I'm really, really organized. If you look at my resume, I've done big jobs in hospital organizations, and I can get it all done. But I don't integrate my feeling very well. And what I found was I had been safe in all my little AA meetings, and I could sit there and I could be heard and I could listen and I could feel, and it was this wonderful place for that to exist that I didn't have in my life. And then they asked me to be secretary. And secretary requires a little bit of analyzing and a little bit of timekeeping and a little bit of keeping a name straight. And I realized that in that domain it was really hard for me to do both. And it was this weird light bulb moment that's one of the things I'm called to do. I can do both really well in isolation, but it's finding that balance and that peace in integrating. And I can do both for you, but it's hard for me to do both in my own skin. So that'll be my life journey.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for being here today and sharing your story with us. I feel that sometimes the statement of issues can be very dry, and having a person here, like you said, you're not just a license on a wall, allows us to make a better decision. So thank you. I have a couple of questions for you. The first is, you mentioned steps 6 and 7 were more difficult for you. Could you explain what steps 6 and 7 are and why?
Yeah, 6 and 7 are acknowledging your deficits or your character flaws, as they're called, and then being willing for them to be released. And there's a wonderful book called Drop the Rock. It's not really literature approved by AA, but it's fantastic. And they don't discourage it; they just don't have it on the approved list. But so 6 and 7 is a journey of trying to figure out what characteristics that live inside of me are working for me or not working for me. Okay, so you could say they were bad characteristics, which I'm trying to get out of the habit of doing. So I know I'm very judgmental. It's a character flaw that I have, judgmental. But being judgmental saves you in a lot of situations. It's very handy to be judgmental. And it's the wisdom of knowing when is judgment helpful to me and when is being overly judgmental eating me up. Or fearful. I now, when I go into a place of PTSD or fearful anxiety, I almost immediately go to an apology to God, because I can't live in fear and faith at the same time. I really can't. They kind of have to flicker. And I know that I'm not seen as less in my God's eyes when I do have fear. That's a human emotion. But if fear is going to drive my bus, then my bus is going to crash. And I have to then realize that and not turn to a drink or exercise or whatever external approval. I need to turn to faith and go, this will be what it will be. Same way with judgment. Instead of judgment, okay, why am I judging that? Maybe I need to find a place of compassion, something that can turn this into a better situation for whoever I'm judging, whatever I'm judging, or if that person is me that I'm judging, maybe I need to look at that. And that's what 6 and 7 have done for me, and I have to live there, because every day I keep going to fear and I keep going to judgment, and it really helps me with that.
Thank you. And my final question is around your length of time you've been sober. You've been sober since July 11, 2014, which we're coming on 5 years. However, the time between both of your DUIs was around 5 years.
Okay.
So that is my main concern, is I haven't really seen you go beyond that limit of time. And if we were to remove you from probation, it would remove our ability to monitor you during this time that has proven to be sort of a challenging breaking point. So can you speak to that sort of length of time, or your ability to successfully practice with a full and unrestricted license, even though you relapsed within 5 years prior?
Right. Well, within the 09 to 14 time period, I've been honest to the board to say I was relapsing on a regular basis of every 4 to 6 months anyway, at the best I could do. And this is consecutive sobriety, so that's one thing. Additionally, after the 14, I've again, I'll put another plug in for the EMDR. I mean, it's not the only answer, but for someone who, in addition to having an alcoholic gene, being raised in an alcoholic family, needing to have the fellowship of AA, but also having the abuse component, the EMDR was very helpful for me. And it's crazy, and I encourage, if you haven't done research on it, look at it, because it makes no sense. Like, why would it work? I mean, they basically have you have a counter statement to a core negative statement that you might have in your being, like, I don't have a voice. And then it's, what would you do if you had a voice? I have a voice. And they have you do rapid eye movement back and forth, which is somehow influencing the hemispheres of the brain and rewiring something that's very deeply seated. So deeply seated that in a flash, you might do something that you hadn't thought through. That's the best I can explain it, and I can tell you that after 4 of those sessions, the compulsion to drink went away. But I'm not hedging my bet on that, so I participate in AA. I have a sponsor, I have a sobriety date, I do some volunteer work that I enjoy that gets me in a spiritual place. Anyway.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Dr. Dominguez.
Good morning or afternoon. I think we're running past.
Merry Christmas.
As long as we're there. Thank you for coming before the board this morning. I just had a couple of short questions. The first one is to sort of follow up on Dr. Rubina Amen's question about why now, when really your probation is set to end January of this coming year. And you sort of said that the terms of probation have been very difficult on you. So I guess my question is, do you feel at this point, or let me phrase it a different way, prior to this probation, do you feel that you were a risk to the people of California?
If I show up authentically, I will tell you that I think that veil was removed before I came here. I was prepared in the April of 2016 to assist my aunt in her health issues, to return to my Illinois home after a short sojourn here. I still don't have a license to drive back. I don't have the money to do it. And I lost that license in Illinois. So I ride an electric green bike about 60 miles a week. So when I don't have the expense of some of this compliance, I may be able to turn my head to getting a license to drive back. But no, I don't think I was a risk when the compliance began, and any more than I think I am today. But I do appreciate that you have a job to do and that you have to demonstrate to the public that within what's reasonable, you've done that, you're doing that. I don't put this on any of you or the process, except to say that if it were reasonable for a petitioner to have been allowed to live their life in the other state and be monitored, which I think there are some vehicles for that to have been able to be done. It may not have had the same financial, and I don't think any of you intended for that financial reality to hit me that way, but that is indeed what it did. So, but I don't think I'm a risk to the state of California. I think I'm a benefit to the state of California. I'm helping a lot of patients.
Second question, would you consider this probationary period to be an opportunity for you to take inventory?
I've certainly made full use of that, and I will continue to do so.
I think I have one last question. So, your blood alcohol content was 0.28 this last time. It's about 3.5 times the legal limit. You were evaluated and deemed to be clinically inappropriate for Maximus. I'd just sort of like to hear what that means to you.
Well, I guess I interpreted what they said to me and their release, that the evidence up to that point showed that I had pursued recovery and was on a sustained recovery path. And that's the commitment I continue to make to myself, my husband, every day. That's what it meant to me. I don't know if I misinterpreted that.
I think you heard the petitioner before you say that, I don't want to put, let's put it this way. Would you consider, well, actually, that's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Watkins.
Hi.
Hi.
I just have a few questions. Pointed around one thing that I think you can clarify. I think all of us who read the case, we were confused about one specific thing. Why did you pursue with all these constraints to hold on to the California license, right? And then you painfully described how it has affected your life negatively, right? You explained to us how the cost and everything, and at the same time, earlier when you did the opening statement, you said of how it contributed to your life, right? So now there's two opposing sides to it, right? And so and then like Dr. Domingos just asked, what was, the last question in particular, why, so I want to get this straight quickly, because this is the question that was just asked lines up with a very important thing that I couldn't understand, and your explanation of what it means to be clinically inappropriate, right? And that you explained to us now in this short phrase that the clinical inappropriateness was that you've had a lot of therapy and done a lot of work before. Am I correct?
The way that I interpreted Maximus's decision not to have me continue under their program, because it was explained to me that their program was the rehabilitative arm of the program, that they had no more to offer me than what I'd already demonstrated willingness to do, complete, and sustain. It was my understanding that to further require me to participate in that program would have only served really as a punishment, because it would have come at, again, a greater expense with no, in their opinion, because it was their decision, not mine, in their opinion, with no clinical benefit to me. That's how I interpreted what was said to me. We'd have to have one of their people here to restate that. I know at the time in some of the interviewing, I had asked, I'm there by Betty Ford. I'd only been into one 30-day program, one outpatient program, and I expressed to them that if they felt that clinically I needed more rehab, I'd go to Betty Ford. I know my insurance would cover that. But the Maximus program, which I believe was $400 a month at that time, for every month that you participate, I could not submit that to my insurance. I have to pay cash money for that. There's no vehicle to submit that to a mental health or behavioral health insurance plan. So what I interpreted may not be correct. I don't know if you have a different view on those.
No, you actually had the correct interpretation. That's what I was pointing to. Your interpretation was correct. So my question is, you knew that it wasn't working because you had a history up to that point to 2014 where it wasn't working. So then the decision was made to move to California. I'm just answering a question, the question about why move to California if you have the whole life set up in Illinois and you love playing with the horses and you've got your whole life set up, but it's also the place where the addiction lives. It's also the residence of the addiction since, for all this time, because both DUIs occurred in Illinois.
I don't know that geographical relocations really work for people. I had already established in Illinois the beginnings of the sobriety. We could debate whether or not that was enough time in Illinois. I didn't choose to come and stay here, but the circumstances mandated that I did. So I'm not sure I want to go down this road with you, but I'm not sure where we're going.
We are going to the place about, you talk about accountability and choice. And you actually mention it very clearly in your opening statement, which was amazing. And you speak about I want to find the word, but you speak about a full accountability.
Yes.
That got my attention.
Yes.
Because a full accountability and the acceptance for my actions, that, now my past actions has actually caught up with me. Here's a letter coming from the board pointing this out. So there's an accountability. So ultimately, your choices brought you to a point that impacted your California license. At the same time, when you made a choice through various life circumstances to come back to California.
Yes.
And then finding out that you were pretty successful up to now, you discovered all these different things while being on the program, made amazing discoveries that you've articulated very impressively to all of us about what you've discovered. So I just want my final question is, directly, did this program and did this part of the process, however hard it is, added enough value for you to take your recovery process to compliance to a whole nother level? Or would you have gotten the same result if there was no compliance, if you were just right there?
That's a $64,000 question. There is the story of the good wolf and the bad wolf, and which one is more powerful. The Indian chief who's telling the story about the bad wolf that's always on one shoulder and the good wolf that's on the other, and they're always warring. And the son says, well, which one wins? Which other one I feed more? And so it is my desire to feed the area of growth and to see, because you're right, there's always two sides of every coin. And part of the alcoholic's crazy mind is that it will torture itself through, but what if, but what if, but what if? Today I accept that I am where I am, and that this is exactly where God would have me to be. I know we're running a little short on time, but I'll tell you that in 1987, when I was applying to be a physical therapist, and it was actually at this institution, one of the assignments we were given was we had to interview a person who had recently been given a terrible diagnosis. And I guess the purpose of the task was to see if we could handle the emotionality that went along with that interview. And we were given a list of questions to ask. And I hated this assignment because it's like, oh, your house just burned down, how do you feel? And I had to ask this young man at Rancho Los Amigos Hospital who was now to be a quadriplegic after trying to help his father cutting down some limbs off a tree. He fell out and he became a quadriplegic forevermore. That was in 1987, and that assignment affected me drastically. And I used to tell my husband, even through the course of our marriage, I wonder what happened to that man, because when I was interviewing him, he said to me, I'm supposed to get married in a few months, and I'm not going to get married to her. She didn't sign up to marry a man with no legs. And something spoke to me, and I said to that guy, give it a little time, give it a year. She's not going to understand if you walk away from her right now. Don't push her away. But I've wondered about him. That was from 1987. Flash forward to 2016. I'm trying to struggle with my God and my understanding of, am I doing this for ego? Why am I staying in California? Why is this so flippin' important to me? And then my aunt says to me, can you stay and help with my grandbaby? Can you be a presence in the state? Okay, what do I do? Am I doing the right thing? I turned to prayer. I prayed. I need a sign. Am I supposed to stay here and devastate my financials and my husband and my marriage potentially? What am I to do? I had some physical problems, some terrible pain in my stomach, terrible pain. I didn't know what it was. I'm never ill. I never have pains and problems. 2016, I'm in Palm Desert, California, and I get sent for a CAT scan at Eisenhower Medical Center. And in rolls a guy, the radiologist, in a wheelchair. And my therapy brain never shuts up, as well as my mouth. But I thought, wow, I never thought to tell my patients they could train to be a radiologist. I didn't realize that they had the physicality to do this job. I'm thinking that he gives me the iodine contrast, and he has to come back to me because I have a bad reaction to the contrast. Now I get bold, and I look at his name tag, and I say, Fred, were you a radiologist before or after your injury? I'm a physical therapist, and I just never thought about this as a career choice. And he said, and I'm not making this up, he said, no, I was a radiologist before I fell out of the tree. And I said, Fred, are you kidding me? Were you in Rancho Los Amigos in 1987? And he said, yeah, how'd you know that? I said, I interviewed you, and your dad was beyond himself with guilt because he thought he made you a paraplegic. Is he okay? He goes, yeah, he got okay with it. He died a couple years ago. And I said, did you marry her? And he started crying, and he pulled out his wallet, and he pulled out his 2 children. There's 2 daughters that are going to college. And he said, we did, and we had to use extraordinary means to have these 2 little girls. And we were both in tears. Now, if that is not the hand of God telling me I was right where I needed to be, I don't know what was. And I went home that night, and I called my husband, who was in Illinois, and I said, you'll never believe who I saw today. But he knew about that story because he knew I had always wondered I would pray for that guy who I didn't even know his name anymore, but I just prayed he had a good life. And then God gave me an answer when I'd wondered how it turned out. Now, I didn't make that up. That really, really happened. So I could not defy the universe and not go down the road I chose.
Okay, so at this point, I'm going to say, if we're not having a conversation, if there's not a question, and there's something for an opinion, we'll save it to the board meeting, okay?
Perfect.
So let's get, we're now well past the time when we still have one other case, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tanya McMillan. It sounds like, 'cause I don't know you, but it sounds like you're an avid, enthusiastic learner. You mentioned EMDR, and I know here it's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Okay.
And you have a lot of tools in your chest, but can you tell me how EMDR helps you with your rescuer tendencies?
I don't know that EMDR helped with that aspect of my codependency or my Al-Anonic behaviors. It helped me uncover a paradigm that I didn't really know existed and replace it with a healthier voice. The rescuer tendencies, I still have them. That's why I'm kind of cautious about, I want to give back in AA. I'm a little cautious with my boundaries with being a sponsor because I tried to rescue my whole family as well. So you're right on target with that.
And I know we don't have a lot of time, but I like TJ, I was just really wondering why you were still here in California, especially with all of the hardships that you're facing. But I'm glad that you're honest about the discomfort, and especially the discomfort even with your self-assessment that you're doing and your need for answers. Do you know the difference between needing an answer and wanting an answer?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. And last question, what do you do for fun?
I love horses. I love animals. I've been enlisted on a bowling team recently last season, which was good fun. I've been asked to participate in a community fashion show. That was a good event. I love teaching, but I'm a little limited on that. But I still teach just by example. What else I do for? I love to travel. My husband and I do enjoy travel. Those are most of my fun things.
Thank you.
It's 12:15, it's been a
Okay.
while since our last meeting.
Okay, so we have to take a break, but if we can do any closing or any final remarks within the next 5 minutes, that would be really good, so that we can let this, close this case and submit it.
Sure. First, I have 2 certified documents that I would like to have marked and entered into evidence.
Have you shown it to the petitioner?
Yeah, they're in the binder.
Oh, okay, they're in the binder, okay.
This is Exhibit 5, which is a certified copy of the decision and order in Ms. Hoskins' case.
Okay, so if you looked at these, Ms. Hoskin?
Yes.
And do you have any objections to this, Exhibit 5?
No.
So Exhibit 5, as described in the exhibit list, is marked and admitted.
And Exhibit 7, or the document behind tab 7, is her certified probation records.
Okay. Have you seen all these records, Ms.
I have.
Hoskins? Okay, do you have any objection?
No.
Okay, so the certified records as described in the exhibit list and marked as Exhibit 7 is admitted. Okay, are you withdrawing Exhibit 6?
And 3, yes, 6 and 3.
Okay, so Exhibits 6 and 3 are withdrawn, and everyone can pull their copies out of their notebooks, and we'll give it back to you. Did you have any final remarks at this point? Beginning with Ms. Fry.
Just very, very briefly, in closing, Ms. Hoskins' road to recovery and progress is commendable. We have a sobriety date from 2014, and that is a major accomplishment. Alcoholism, however, is a chronic condition, and the recovery process is long and well known to be characterized by relapse. Ms. Hoskins' own criminal history shows this, with 2 DUIs about 5 years apart. So for the sake of public protection and Ms. Hoskins' continued successful rehabilitation, she should complete the remaining 6 months of her probation. Thank you.
Okay. Would you like to make any closing remarks that are not redundant of all your testimony? Just any final remarks?
Just thank you for your time today, and we'll go forward from there.
Okay. So with that, you both submit the matter for decision by the board?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, the matter is submitted and the record is closed. We're off the record. Thank you very much. Okay. Yeah, let's- you wanna go
Do I need
straight
to
to-
sign anything?
I don't really think it's appropriate, but
The court reporter is going to give us a sheet in case you want a copy of the transcript.
the whole thing.
We have other matters besides this.
Okay, so I'm going to have to talk to the court reporter. Because, you have food.
Recess for 15.